Hey,
Hey, so are you ready for me to break your heart?
well, I'm always ready to have my heart broken.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump in and we'll do whatever explaining we need to as we go along.
Okay.
The story I'm going to tell you today is about a girl named Mary Ann Eccles. Okay,
Okay.
Eccles is Eccles. Now, for those who are familiar with Utah and, some prominent Mormon families out in Utah will recognize the Eccles name. Eccles family is a very prominent, historically very wealthy family in Utah. The main Eccles guy, and I apologize, I think his name's David, was at the late 1800s. He was considered like the Rockefeller of Utah. So, I mean,
Mm,
very, very
mm.
prominent. The stadium at the University of Utah is the Rice Eccles Stadium. So, I mean, that's the kind of money we're talking about. That is not our family.
Okay.
So because people that are listening might be like, Eccles, that
Okay.
is not
So
them.
different Eccles.
Yes.
Okay.
But let
So
me
then
actually,
how is she related to us?
I'll tell you that in a minute, but I do want to
Okay.
clarify one thing.
Hmm.
So, Mary Ann Eccles, her father is Thomas Eccles. Thomas Eccles is not actually an Eccles,
Okay.
and this is why. So, his mother was married to, her name was Anne, was married to Richard Eccles, had two children. Richard died. Mary Ann, I'm sorry, Anne, Thomas's mother, had a baby out of wedlock. Quite the
Mm,
scandal. His name was James Bennett. He did not marry her, but there are records of her suing him for child support, which
mm,
that's interesting to me because I don't know a lot about English because they were in England and I'm going to get to all those details.
yeah.
English, illegitimate children, child support,
Mm,
all of those things. That's pretty
mm,
fuzzy for me. I thought it was fascinating that there are records that people have found that she
mm,
sued him for and received child support for this child.
mm,
But in order to, I don't know, save face, I mean, women have been so demonized for, you know, it, pregnancies outside of marriage for so
yeah.
long. I in no way agree with the word illegitimate or bastard or whatever, but that is what it was
Right.
called at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
In order to reduce the gossip and reduce the scandal, she gave her son that she had with this James Bennett the same last name as her older children. And so he was named Thomas Eccles, even though if Mr. Bennett had married her, his name would have been Thomas Bennett. So now let me clarify something else about this prominent Eccles family in Utah. I have not been able to find a connection, but again, I'm not a great genealogist between the two families that Eccles that Anne married into and then this prominent Eccles family. However, the prominent Eccles family from Utah, their Eccles ancestors come from the exact same part of England as this Eccles family. I think the Eccles are related to each other. But even if they are related to each other, we are not actually Eccles because
Sure.
Thomas is his real father was a Bennett. However, he was raised as an Eccles, and that is the name that has been carried on. So as I tell this story, I am going to pull up Family Search. I'm going to be like looking up now. Family Search, for those that aren't familiar, it's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is the corporate church out of Salt Lake City, which is the main what is called Mormon church. They don't like being called that anymore. And I do want to be as respectful as I can. But again, I was called Mormon growing up.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I claim that for myself because that's how I identify.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. We called ourselves that
Yeah,
thousands of times growing up.
right. And so I just hope that those who may be believing members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, if they are listening to this, I'm not using that word Mormon to be dismissive or
Hmm.
disrespectful, but I'm telling my story. And so I'm
Yeah.
claiming the right to say the word Mormon. Okay, so so Family Search is the Mormon churches, the main Bergamite out of Salt Lake City church, the wealthy church. It is their genealogy website. And I love it. I use it a lot. Thankfully, you don't have to be a member to have an account. And so
Mm, mm,
I have found it interesting and it does make me kind of sad, but there are some pieces of information that active believing Mormons get that those who are not Mormons don't get. And I'm still a member of record. I've never removed my name
mhm.
from the church thus far, and I mean we can get into those reasons
Yeah.
another time. But some of that information I can't see anymore. And so again, story for another day. But that which has been communicated to Mormon leaders about my level of participation has
Mhm.
resulted in some of my access to the site being removed. Such as like, because I'm really curious, like when people were baptized, and but
Hmm.
those are considered ordinances, and I can't see those anymore on
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
site. And it makes me sad because like that is information for me about when my ancestors were officially connected with Mormonism. I don't know why that needs to be secretive. Some of the
It
other
is.
stories will say, this person got baptized at this time, and so I can get the information that way. It used to be that I could go to a specific link and it would show
Yeah.
exactly when, and that doesn't show up on mine anymore. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway, it is what it is. But so for those that don't know, Family Search is the church's, it's akin to ancestry.com, only it is the church's site, and they operate somewhat differently. Some
Mm.
people that love Ancestry don't like Family Search,
Okay.
because when you make a change on Family Search, it applies to I think, I'm happy to be corrected. If anybody's listening and I get this wrong, I'm happy to be corrected. But from what I understand, on Family Search, you can make changes. Anybody that has an account, you can make the changes, you can update the information, you can put new information, you can put new memories, you can put new documents on the
Mm.
site. And it applies to pretty much the entire database. When somebody does that, it will update mine. The problem is because it is so democratic, people can input incorrect information and it will
Yeah.
change your tree. And then
Yeah.
you come back afterwards and correct it. And there's a lot of people that don't like that. Whereas on Ancestry, you have full control of your tree.
Okay.
And if somebody makes a change to their own, you'll get an alert saying, this change was made. Would you like to view it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you can decide whether or not you think that information is accurate or complete or whatever, and in order for it to update your tree. So there's
Mm.
some differences there. But
Mm.
anyway, I'm mostly going to be using the church's site today, and then, we'll see what happens in the future.
Mhm.
So let me find what I'm looking for, and then I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. I'm suddenly trying to figure out how to not show identifying information. Give me a second. I'm trying to figure that out. I'll just go back and edit out the silence. Let me think about this. Sorry. I think what I'm going to have to do is edit it later. I don't think I can, which is fine. I think I can do, I don't think it's an issue. Okay, give me a second. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen so that you can see. Can you see that? All right. So let me show you how we are related. I'm not going to go any further down. We're trying to be respectful of family and, privacy and all of that. So I'm not going to go any further down than great-grandparents, I think. And I'll just
Yeah.
tell you whose parents they are. Can you see at the bottom of the screen here, there's 4 groupings.
Yeah.
The first one is our father's father, our father's mother, our mother's father,
Mhm.
our mother's mother. Okay. So this is our mother's mother, her family. Okay. So Margaret Geneva is our great grandmother.
Okay.
And then Robert Eccles Robinson is great great. And then third great grandmother is Mary Ann Eccles, and she is who we're talking about today.
Okay.
So we're going to access her story first through her father. So I'm just going to click on Thomas Eccles. And then, so on Family Search, there's all kinds of records that people have brought up. And as we read through some of these, we're going to get little bits of information and we'll just talk about the story. And I want you to ask as many questions as you want to, okay? So the first thing that we're going to read here is about Thomas Eccles. Some of the information isn't always the same wherever you look. In this document, it says that James Bennett was an Eccles. He wasn't. So this information isn't completely accurate, but that is the nature of family history. Like,
Yeah. How do we know that's true? Because here's a record that says it's true. How do
yeah.
we know
So,
it's not?
well, let me tell you why I think it's not true.
Okay.
This is a personal account that somebody, one of our distant relatives, wrote about Thomas Eccles.
Okay. When did they write it?
Well, I don't know. That's a good question.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know. But when it comes to the actual dates and the things that are in the family tree, those are regularly scrutinized by a lot of people. And I've been looking at this for several years and the information has not changed. Okay. So that
Okay.
tells me that it's people that care, agree
Right.
that information is accurate. Whereas this, and that's the thing about, say, public history,
Mhm.
and especially in Mormonism, we are taught so much to honor our pioneer ancestry and make records and so forth, that, people sit down and they write what they understand to be true. And
Okay.
oftentimes they, well, especially in Mormonism, we're taught to make sure everything is faith promoting.
Right. Right.
And so what I suspect is that somebody likely said, James Bennett, they must have forgot to put his last name on because
Mhm.
Thomas couldn't possibly be the son of somebody he didn't share
Yeah.
the name with.
Right.
Like I have to look at it through the lens of what the person writing this was
Mhm.
likely thinking as a fellow Mormon. Like I've put my Mormon brain on.
Yeah. Now, is this document here, is this a scan of an original?
Yeah, it's a scan of what somebody typed up, their memories.
So, yeah, so th this looks like it's a mechanical typewriter. So, some descendant typed this up sometime probably before the 1970s.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
And we can see who contributed it right down here at the bottom, if you can see my cursor.
Hmm.
Dorothy K. Wallace, one. I'm assuming she's a distant relative. Just
Yeah.
because she contributed it does not mean that she wrote it.
Right.
This could
Right.
have been in the papers of her grandparents or her great grandparents that just ended up in a box that ended up at her house, and she's
Hmm.
doing what she feels is the responsible thing, and she's sharing the information with the internet so that other people can have access to it.
Right.
That's what's hard about doing this kind of research. I was just listening to an episode of Sunstone Mormon History Podcast where Lindsay was talking about this, that, families, of course, there's lots of descendants and branches, and eventually the people aren't really in touch with each other. Like we don't know our second or third cousins really, right?
Sure. Right. Yeah.
But those family stories get passed down to everybody in different forms and different
Yeah.
variations. And one person remembers this detail that somebody else doesn't. And the grandchildren of those two people who may be cousins, and now suddenly we're talking about like third cousins, are hearing two different stories.
Hmm. Okay.
So but there's value in that too, because even with documents, when we're talking about documentary history, even in documents, people don't always get everything right.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so even like a historian like Matt Harris, who, recently published the Second Class Saints book,
Yeah.
and he did a book on Ezra Taft Benson, and I mean, he is a scholar.
Yeah. He's a trained historian. Yeah.
Yes. I've listened to lots of interviews with him, and I've heard, like with him, he looks at the documents,
Yeah.
but tries to verify on the other side everything that he finds as much as possible.
Right.
Even when we're talking about documents, like documentary history, it's always possible something isn't accurate.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's why um, trained historians are always talking about independent attestation. If they can find unrelated records that have the same information, that
Exactly.
increases the chance that it's a historically accurate record.
And contemporary recordings of an event, as in somebody who wrote it down as close
Hmm.
to when the
Yeah.
event happened as possible,
Yeah. Both in
tends to
time
be
and geography.
exactly
Yeah.
tends to be more trusted than somebody that's remembering an incident
Yeah.
30 years
Yeah.
later.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that the person's remembering it incorrectly, because if you have one source that's being, a contemporary recording of an incident, and then somebody else completely different records what they remember 30 years later and they match, that's really solid support.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
true. We can only go on, like the more evidence for something means the more likely that it's true.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as we all know, history is written by the victors.
Sure. Yeah.
All we can do when we're talking about history is do the best that we can.
Yeah. It's all, yeah. History is about probability. What's
Exactly.
most likely to have happened. Yeah.
Exactly. And for the most part, I do think people write down the truth. Most people aren't maliciously changing things.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about this message that Mormons get from the church, that we need to keep a record, and the reason why is to promote the faith.
Hmm. Yeah.
It needs to be faith promoting so that your
Yeah.
descendants inherit your faith, kind of a
Hmm.
thing. I find that a lot in histories that have been uploaded, that they are written from that faithful perspective. And so I don't look at that critically as in like I can't trust anything this person said, but I
Sure.
do keep that in mind as I read through it, that maybe what they're describing is either a whitewashed version, a rose-colored glasses version.
Hmm.
Maybe they're making assumptions like here. I think, and this is just me, I'm a regular person, not a historian. I think because I know how I thought as a Mormon, right?
Hmm.
I see this cute little grandma sitting down to write about her grandpa, and she's thinking, wait a second, how come it's James Bennett? They must have
Yeah.
got to put his last name on there.
Yeah.
That's where my brain goes, but of course I don't know
Yes.
for sure, but I think that's likely.
Well, and yeah, again, going back to the probability idea, that is a probable uh, uh, yeah, that's a probable way somebody would have thought about this situation.
Right,
So
right,
it's not like they made a name change for a completely indecipherable reason.
right.
You know, adding a name in order to protect the reputation of your grandma is a reasonable thing for somebody to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there's a lot of that as we go through stories in this entire podcast project, as I'm sharing stories with you. That is a frame of, that's a, I don't know, an understanding that's important to
Mm,
apply to pretty much
mm.
everything.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and honestly, it coheres with how the majority of history has been written over the centuries.
exactly.
I mean, it's only, since the creation of this scientific method have we really thought of history as an accurate record rather than a persuasive record or rather than a myth-building record or any other version. So this is just kind of carrying on that torch, I guess.
Right.
I
And
mean, to view it, generously.
right, right, because there are those who make it up in order to make themselves look good. That
Yeah,
does happen, and it has
yeah.
happened throughout history. I don't think that most people do that, but
Hmm.
the difference between outright lying, presenting something that is faith promoting because you genuinely believe that
Yeah,
that's what you should
yeah,
be doing. I can't criticize those people. I used to think that way. But because I know what it's like to think that way, I'm
yeah,
able to
yeah.
apply that understanding as I look through
Hmm.
what people have uploaded, because it is what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just gonna say something else, and now I can't remember what it was. Anyway, we'll just jump in and we'll learn a little bit about Thomas because I want to understand a little bit of the background because of course we're gonna talk about who Mary Ann is. We need to
Hmm.
know a little bit about her parents.
Okay.
So
Her parents are Thomas and Alice.
yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, and as we do this, specifically, I'm hoping that you will look for, and I'm doing the same thing, but that you will look for events, facts that likely caused trauma, because that's what we're looking for, right?
Mhm.
We're looking for signs of trauma so that we, as modern day, I guess, hereditary Mormons, I'm trying to find the
Mhm.
right word for it. And, this applies to anybody, even outside of Mormonism, obviously, but and some of the trauma that we will run into is not caused by Mormonism. For example, Thomas grew up, with a single mom in a time like he was born in 1819. I mean, we're talking, this is even pre-industrial revolution. Well, it's very, very, very early industrial revolution.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a time in history that for me, unless like I really look it up, it's hard to even like put myself there, right? But having, I mean, she was a single mom because her husband passed away. People knew that he was not legitimate. Like
Okay.
there would have been some trauma there in regard to how he was treated because
Hmm.
of that.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's not specific to Mormonism. Obviously, that was just the way
Hmm.
the culture was,
Hmm.
but it still could create in him some insecurity.
Sure.
Am I good enough?
Hmm.
I'm not good enough because and people we try to cover it because Eccles, took my sibling's father's name, but
Hmm.
there would have been something there. And for me, that informs me about a little bit, and it's just one thing about his life. It's a big thing. It's very influential to his psychology, but
Hmm.
it's just one thing about his life that when I look at the choices he makes, like I can understand him a little bit better. There likely was some sense of inferiority that he carried.
Hmm.
I don't know a ton of other details about his life, but that I do know. So, and that's the type of thing where I'm like, okay, I have a little bit of a sense of something that he carried, right?
Right.
So
Hmm.
just what this person says about him, Thomas Eccles was born to James Bennett. It's not, but we'll go on. James Bennett. He was born in Wilton, Chorley Parish, Lancashire, England,
Hmm.
April 11th, 1819. And at the age of 22, in 1841, Thomas was baptized a member of the LDS Church. So that's our big, that's our first big piece of information.
Hmm.
That's when he joined the church. Now, a book that I have been reading, where did it go? Right here is this one. And I don't actually know if this is going to show up on the screen backwards. I don't know how that works. But this book is Men with a Mission, The Quorum of the 12 Apostles in the British Isles, 1837 to 1841. It's the first major book that was written about the Mormon apostles when they went to Britain to spread the gospel, to spread Mormonism. And that time frame, 1837 to 1841, is considered the first British mission.
Hmm.
So when we look at that date, he was baptized in 1841. He was part of that movement. He was baptized during those years. Now the apostles that served missions during that time, Brigham Young, John Taylor, Wilford Woodruff, I think Willard Richards, Heber C. Kimball, these are some of the most prominent Mormon names, right? People that descend from these people, Mormon royalty, and so we can only assume that our ancestor was baptized by, now there were some other missionaries that aren't as famous today because they didn't end up being Mormon leadership. I don't know who baptized him specifically, but it has been fun as I've read this book, when they talk about the apostles being certain places in England during certain time periods, I can look and see if we have ancestors in that area and be able to see they were probably baptized while this was going on. And I can see through this book when that happened. So I love this book for that reason. It is written by, I think they were BYU professors. It's definitely written from a faith promoting perspective. So they don't share stories from any other perspective than, this was God's doing. But the actual dates and the locations and the places and, that type of thing is. And I've heard Brian Buchanan on Sunstone History Podcast reference this book and how excellent it is. Now, he knows more than me. He finds it a very valuable source. I can only assume that there's no reason that they're not telling the truth about locations and dates and things like that. So I don't not trust books that were written from a faithful perspective. It's just I have to keep reading as I read it.
Yeah. Well, I'm just struck by the years, if the Mormon Church really only started in the 1830s.
Yeah.
By 1841, they already have missionaries. And of course, I certainly learned this, 30 years ago, but my perspective 30 years ago was a teenager. I knew nothing about the world. I knew nothing about the state of America and Europe in the 1800s. I'm just struck at how soon Mormons were established and organized well enough to start sending missionaries out, back to Europe.
So I am pretty sure. So the church was formally begun, right? Started officially April 6, 1830 in upstate New York. By 1831, the church had moved to Ohio and it was already growing significantly. Whole congregations of other people were joining the movement. We can talk another time about why people tend to join groups like that and,
Yeah, the cultural elements that were in full
cultural
bloom at the
elements.
time.
We can talk another time about that.
Sure,
But
sure.
it was
Yeah,
all
I'm just
growing.
struck by the date.
Yes. And so what I was going to say is 1831, they were already in Ohio. I think Joseph Smith was, from my memory, he was sending out missionaries stateside very early, like early 1830s. It was not long before he was sending missionaries out to preach Mormonism to those areas. New York, New York, Ohio, like all of those. I mean, Massachusetts, all of New England, basically. At a certain point, they did send some missionaries in with Native Americans, but in 1837 was when he first sent missionaries over to England. This is just a quick side tangent. When I looked at our family history, just give me a second to find this. Because I was curious, as I've been doing this research, I've been curious at what point, who are our earliest ancestors that joined Mormonism? I'm not positive yet. I haven't quite figured it out. It might be the Cahoon family. Now, when it comes to prominent early church leaders, we do descend from Reynolds Cahoon. He is mentioned in Doctrine and Covenants. He's mentioned in quite a few of the various histories. He was a close associate of Joseph Smith. He was never an apostle or anything like that, but he's pretty much the most prominent Mormon we ever descended from. They came in contact with the church in Kirtland, Ohio. They just lived in Ohio when the Mormons showed up in Ohio. Like they were there first, the Cahoons
Mhm.
were, and that's about when and I'm not sure, I need to look it up. I think Reynolds Cahoon and his wife, Thurza Stiles was her name. I think they joined the church 1831, 1832, so very, very early. I think they're our earliest convert ancestors. We'll get to their story another time. When you're talking about missionaries, what was interesting to me, I was curious I was curious if we had any families in the state of New York when Joseph Smith first started doing what he was doing, because I was wondering if any of them joined the church any earlier than Ohio. It was really difficult to join the church any earlier than Ohio because there wasn't a church until 1830. They were in Ohio in 1831. We have 6 families that lived in the state of New York within what would now be a 2-hour drive. Obviously, back
Mm.
then it would have taken longer, from Palmyra. So as the story of Mormonism spread out from Palmyra during those days, we have 6 families: the Cutlers, Cahoons, Catlins, Homers, Pratts, and Bishops. All lived in the state of New York, not far, really, upstate New York, really not far from Palmyra. So these families would have been hearing about Mormonism. None of them joined
Mm.
during that time period. They joined within like a 10-year period, but they would have been hearing about it. So I just thought that was really interesting that, I mean, our family really came out of New York having heard
Mm.
about Mormonism very early on. So anyway, yes, 1837 is when they sent missionaries to England, and this particular ancestor, Thomas Eccles, joined as a 22-year-old. He was single, 1841, so very early.
Mm.
Let's see. Alice Hardman was the woman he married, and she is the child of Abraham Hardman and Mary Loomis. She was born in 1821, so she is about, a year and a half, well, no, about 2 years, a little over 2 years younger than him. Let me skip down a little bit. As a young woman, Alice began working in what was called the cellar. It was evidently a cloth making and printing factory, and a young man named Thomas Eccles also worked there. He was a weaver of cloth. While working together in the factory, they met and fell in love. I guess it was called sparking back then when they,
Mm.
courtship or whatever. And they were married about 2 years later in Lancashire, England.
Mhm.
And so in 1843, and then Alice, the following year in 1844, she joined the Mormon church. So he was already a member, 1841. She joined 3 years later.
Mm.
So that is like the foundation of how Mary Ann's parents joined the church. They were factory workers. They were young. They met each other. They fell in love. He joined pretty early, 1841. She joined 4 years later, or sorry, 3 years later. They had 3 daughters in England. And so now we're gonna shift our focus to Mary Ann, okay? So Mary Ann was born in 1844. She has a sister that was born in 1845. So we're gonna make note of this trauma, okay? And then another sister, Martha, was born in 1847. And it says here that Margaret Eccles, the daughter that was just younger than Mary Ann, is listed as a 6-year-old in a British census record dated 1851. This would indicate she was born in 1845. There are no birth, marriage, or death records for Margaret Eccles in my research. So that's
Yeah.
what this person is saying.
That's likely just because of the time period and poor record keeping and that sort of thing, right? I mean, there's nothing
Yeah.
suspicious about that.
There's nothing suspicious about that. It's not like we think she didn't exist or anything like
Yeah.
that. There's nothing suspicious about that. What I have found when it comes to people that were living at this time period, when we're talking about photographs, when we're
Mhm.
talking about records, someone who died young, it's harder to find those things.
Yeah.
But especially when it comes to photographs, for example, Mary Ann, and we'll get there in a minute. We have a photograph of her when she was a teenager,
Okay.
and then a photograph of her when she was elderly, and that's it. There are no known photographs of Margaret. The reason why we're confident that Margaret passed away before the family moved to America was she was not listed on the ship passenger list. So we just have to look at the dates. For example, she is listed on a British census in 1851.
Yeah.
The family emigrated to America in 1856. Okay?
Mhm.
I'm jumping ahead just a little bit, but 5 years later. She's mentioned as being alive in 1851. We can't find any record of her in 1856. She's not listed on the passenger list. She's not listed in the handcart company that they crossed the plains with, the Mormon handcart company. She's not listed on there. And there's no record of her living in Utah, and nobody in the family talks about her in their records in Utah. You can't find death records of her, but it is a reasonable conclusion to come to that she died sometime before 1851 or sometime between
Okay.
1851 and 1856. And so
So
this is
our ancestor grew up with the loss of an older sister,
of a younger sister.
of a younger sister.
Mary Ann is the oldest, born in
Okay.
1844.
Okay.
We think Margaret was born in 1845 because she was listed as a 6-year-old in 1851 on the census. We don't have the birth record, but it's reasonable to conclude she was 6.
Okay.
You know, that she was born in 1845. So yeah, so that's what I'm trying to get at when we're talking about trauma. Again, this is not directly pertaining to Mormonism, but this
Right.
is still a trauma, right?
Yeah.
Mary Ann and Margaret, likely a year apart, little sisters, grew up together, and sometime between, for Mary Ann, the age of 7 and 11 or 12-ish, probably her best friend, her closest friend, died. So there is some trauma to keep in mind as we go through the rest of her story, that she carries this loss, okay? They had another sister named Martha who was born in 1847, so you know, she's approximately 3 years younger than Mary Ann. I can only assume that they also would have been little buddies. But when the family decided to leave England and go to America, it was Thomas and Alice, the parents, and 2 little girls, Mary Ann and Martha. And they, you know, as they left in the spring of 1856, Mary Ann would have been 11. Martha would have been 9, well, 8, and then she would have turned 9. Okay. So quite young, like 11 and then 12 and then 8 and then 9. So quite young. So let's see. I want to decide. I'm deciding as we go along when to switch over to Mary Ann's record. So Alice and Thomas left England and crossed the Atlantic Ocean on the ship Horizon with their 2 daughters, Mary Ann and Martha. There is no ship record for their daughter, Margaret Eccles. Okay, so now before we go any further, when I say the William Martin Handcart Company, does anything come to your mind?
Well, I certainly remember that name being talked about when we were young. I mean, there were lots of handcart stories. I mean, I suppose if you really put me under pressure, I might be able to excavate some story that we heard. Now, from recent podcasts, isn't that the handcart company that was like just really pushed to the limits of human survival and just had a bedraggled experience, needlessly just deprecated from supplies and well-being and all of that, right?
Yep.
Okay.
That's it. So we're going to talk about that for a few minutes, okay? So I want you to imagine Thomas and Alice, but they're in their early 30s probably. And they have 2 little girls. We're going to say 11 and 8. Their birthdays happen, but we're going to say 11 and 8-year-old little girls. I believe they came to America using the Perpetual Immigration Fund, which is, you know, and again, this is a hard thing for people that don't have a background in Mormonism. We will be throwing things out there that you'll probably be like, what are you talking about? Please feel free to look it up. Perpetual Immigration Fund is, or the PEF. It was something that the church started to help people who did not have the money to immigrate. When I was taught about this as a child, it was always like a very faith promoting thing. It was always like, the church helped these people out. Isn't it wonderful? They could come to America and, you know, live amongst the saints and have the gospel in their lives. And, you know, it was always presented very positively. I want to be fair, you know, like there's a lot that can be said about it being positive. It is not as though people living in England at this time had easy lives, the regular people. Like, I mean, this was the Industrial Revolution. Children worked in factories. Rarely were they educated. They were worked to the bone 7 days a week from dawn till dusk. They barely had time to sleep. They didn't really spend time together. We were always taught that our ancestors had enough faith to join the church and leave
Hmm.
England and come to America. And I don't want to denigrate those that perhaps that was like who they were and,
Hmm. Hmm.
great. What we were never taught about was that they were desperate for a different life.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more to them having joined Mormonism and come to
Mhm.
America than just
Right.
faithful.
That there may have been socioeconomic pressures. There may have been reasons that had everything to do with European culture at the time, European society at the time, that had very little to do with faith.
And this book talks so much about, and I'm glad that they talk about it from a faithful perspective. This millennialism is what they called it. I mean, it was like doomsday. It was like the millennium's coming,
Yeah.
gonna come.
Yeah.
There's gonna be destruction. You got to like join the saints or
Yeah. Yeah.
like repent and all this stuff. And that was not unique to Mormonism. I mean, that was a lot of religions.
No. Yeah, I mean, it was a common breed of just
Mhm.
apocalypticism that
Exactly.
has existed throughout the centuries.
That
Yeah.
is that is the word that did not come to my mind. The apocalyptic. You say it.
Yeah, apocalypticism, yeah. I mean, millennialism, I think, has sprung up a couple of times over the centuries. It's a particular breed of apocalypticism, if I remember right. So, and it's connected with the calendar. Like when the new millennium comes, that's when everything's going to change.
And they, in this book, the BYU historians that wrote this, they do talk about that being something that was preached. Of course, they talk about it in a very faith promoting way. I'm not
Mhm.
criticizing them for that, but when I went to the internet as I was reading through that and because I wanted to know more about, okay, what did that look like from an
Mhm.
outside perspective and so on and so forth. And it really adjusted the narrative for me as
Mhm.
child, as a believing Mormon, I would have looked at this story and said, that's amazing. They
Yeah.
were so faithful. They joined the
Yeah.
church. That's
Yeah.
awesome. But now I look at it as, the positives. I mean, talk about adventurous, talk about
Hmm.
daring, talk about,
Yeah.
cool,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Um, but let's look at the complete picture so that we can understand that the DNA that we inherited, right?
Mhm.
So Alice and Thomas, impoverished, working in factories. The ages of 8 and 11, their little girls likely were working in factories too. When we
Yeah.
talk about Margaret passing away, children died all the time.
Yeah.
Yes, from disease and illness, which was much more mortality rates were affected much more prominently back then because of just disease and illness and all of that.
Yeah.
But let's talk
Proximity.
about,
Yeah.
yeah, but let's talk about safety. Let's talk
Mhm.
about injury. Let's talk
Yeah.
about, there were no worker rights. There were no child labor
Yeah.
laws. None of
Yeah.
that. We don't know. We haven't, I say we as though I was amongst those researching. I wasn't, but those that have done research or knew them or whatever that
Mhm.
have written these things down. And
Yeah.
this, and this is, we're reading one thing, but this is consistent amongst the other things that I've read that nobody's been able to find those death records. We don't know how Margaret died, but we're
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah.
a time in history when she very well may have died in a factory accident. So
Yeah.
there's Thomas and Alice, impoverished. Thomas has joined the church. He left home, and I'm not, I don't know, guiding us through everything. Some of these things I just remember, and I'm going to share with you because it just time, you know what I mean? But Thomas left home at a certain point and was trying to make his own way in the world, which
Mm.
tells me, I mean, people did that. It's not like
Yeah.
he absolutely did not have a good relationship at home or anything, but he didn't have a lot. You know what I mean? Like he was
Yeah.
young, he was married to Alice, little girls, one of them died. They don't what this is the life they would live for the rest
Sure.
of their lives in
I
England.
mean, Europeans who came to the Americas during colonialism, they didn't come because they were part of the bourgeoisie, right? They came because they were at the bottom of the food chain.
Exactly.
And
And right, exactly. And that applied to colonialism all the way up through the
yeah.
Industrial Revolution
Yeah.
and all of that. So when this American church comes along and he has found a sense of community with these
Mhm.
people that are joining Mormonism, there's these Mormon missionaries who are preaching and talking about Zion and building a community devoted to
Mhm.
God. And I mean, it's presented in a very paradise-like way.
Utopian.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, I look at them, I don't fault them for that.
Mhm.
That's real, like
Yeah.
life is hard.
Yeah.
That is who these people are. Those are the circumstances that they're coming out of. That is why they join the church.
Hmm.
Now, you add on top of that, here, new converts to the church, let us help pay for your
Yeah.
passage to a new
Right.
highway.
Yeah.
The Perpetual Emigration Fund would have helped them with the, the money for the passage on the ship, would have helped them with the travel expenses to get to
Mhm.
at this point. And in some of our other ancestral stories, we will be talking about Mormon history all throughout, like a lot of the things that happened in Ohio and Missouri and Nauvoo and winter quarters and getting to that point. For this family, they were not involved in any of that happened in the earliest days of Mormonism. 86 is at this point 26 years after the church was founded. So much has happened in Mormonism up to that point. Joseph Smith had been killed over 10 years earlier, and Brigham Young had been in power. The main body of the church had been in Utah for about 10 years at this point. But there were still missionaries going out throughout the world, mostly indefinitely and like majorly in England, continued to send missionaries to England. Thomas, at this point, he joined in 1841. They didn't leave until 1856. I mean, that's a long time. He was
Yeah.
Mormon in England for a long time.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they had branches, they had congregations all throughout England, and everybody was talking about going to Zion.
Yeah.
So and they created this immigration fund, and the deal was the church loans families the money to get them to Salt Lake, and then once they're in Salt Lake and they can establish themselves, they can pay the money back. And again, when I was learning about that when I was young, it was all positive, it was all good,
Right.
but it's been interesting as I've been learning about Mormon history without loyalty to the church anymore. Um, it's become really clear to me that ended up indenturing people.
Well, I was about to use that word. That sounds a lot like indentured servitude. And
It
that
was.
that sounds a lot like the debt slavery that you still hear news stories about today.
Yeah.
So,
And this is going to offend believing Mormons. I'm not trying to offend anyone,
yeah, I
but
mean,
this is human trafficking.
sure. Yeah. I mean, if it quacks like a duck.
Yep. It looks exactly like it.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I'm not saying they didn't believe. We're talking about a time in history when, like you said, scientific method and
Hmm.
everything that we know about science and the logical things that we just take for granted now.
Yeah. Yeah. Education levels.
Exactly, education
Yeah.
level. They were not stupid people. They were just
No.
products of the time in which
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
were.
Hmm.
I'm not saying they didn't believe. I'm sure they did. And I'm not even saying that in this particular case, Brigham Young was saying, let's pay for these people to come so that we can.
Yeah. Enslave them. Let's,
I'm not even suggesting that.
right.
What I'm
Right.
saying is, regardless of the reasons,
Hmm.
regardless of the belief system, it's still the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And later, when we talk about where they went in Utah and the choices that they made in Utah, I think very much maybe it was just out of obedience because they were faithful to the church and faithful to God, and Brigham Young was a prophet and they were going to do what he said. But it's hard to look at it as purely faith when we know they were indentured underneath that, and they would have
Yeah.
felt if they had said no, they would have been reminded, who knows how harshly, about the debt they owed to the church.
Yeah.
And we are requiring you to do this in order to pay off that debt. You better
Mhm.
go do it. I don't know what that conversation was like. I don't know what happened. I don't know if we are going to if I'm going to use my critical thinking brain and not my indoctrination brain, I have to take all those things into consideration. So it's just something to think about as I have looked at my Mormon history stories, my family history stories through a new lens, a critical thinking lens. These are the
Mhm.
types of things that I'm like, oh, yeah, okay.
Well, and I don't know, maybe this is too simplistic, but this issue always comes up when we consider faith and how that interplays with how the real world actually works, right? Like, if a believer is going to make the argument that, at this historical time, other believers needed to still interact in the world using the methods of getting things done, like the fact that you have to pay for a transatlantic voyage. If it really is so imperative to God that people be in this particular place at this particular time, why isn't he just willing it to happen?
Yeah.
Right? Why was the best method that the people become in a pre-modern sense of the word indebted, not even just like it's a civil thing, but like where you're kind of metaphorically shackled by this debt. Why was that the best method that the creator of the universe could come up with?
Yeah.
And it just feels, I mean, again, from my post-Mormon perspective, it just feels fishy.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. Absolutely. So they come across using the Perpetual Immigration Fund. They
Mm,
end up in, I believe, Iowa City. And again, at this point in Mormon history, the major wagon trains had made it to Salt Lake. It was hard for
mm,
everyone. It was not easy for anyone. Brigham Young started the handcart companies for um, immigrants who were particularly impoverished, that could not afford a wagon, that could not
yeah.
afford that. And the handcarts, for those perhaps that are not familiar with this aspect of Mormon history, anybody who grew up Mormon knows this story or knows about these handcart companies. It was basically wheelbarrow is not the right explanation. I mean, obviously, if
Mm,
you Google handcart, you can see what it looks like. But basically, it was a cart, and you were the draft animal. You
yeah.
held the two sides of it, and you would pull it, and people were walking and pulling their belongings
Hmm.
across
Hmm.
country, across the plains, across the mountains, across the desert until they got to Utah. Were successful companies that had already made and I want to differentiate because when we talk about pioneers, there are the wagon companies. They had wagons and oxen and
Hmm.
horses, and yes, people mostly walked because the stuff was being pulled, right? Again, it's not like they were crossing in luxury, but they had like draft animals to
Yeah.
help
Yeah.
handcart companies. There may have been a wagon or two wagons that carried a lot of things for all the people. Individual families did not have wagons. They pulled their stuff in a handcart.
Yeah.
And there had been some handcart companies that year, and I'm not positive 1856 is when the handcart companies started, or if it started the year before. I'm fuzzy on that. But I do know that there were successful handcart companies that did make it across and before the weather turned and all of that.
Hmm.
But and I'm going to tell a general story from off the top of my head. Those who are interested can look it up more thoroughly, but I'll get into that here in a little bit. So handcart company, well, pioneer companies that the church that were Mormon pioneers, right? They all had a captain, and in this case, we have several ancestors that were captains of their company. In this case, I'm not going to remember their first names, but Mr. Willie, Brother Willie,
Hmm.
was the captain of a company. Brother Martin, I don't remember his first name, captain of a handcart company. And there were actually a couple others. I think it was Hodgett and Hunt. They're not mentioned as much, and I'm not quite sure why. But when this story is told, it's called the Willie and Martin Handcart Company. They were
Okay.
actually two separate companies. They kind of like ran into each other, like, kind of toggled that they one might go ahead, the other might go ahead. They weren't necessarily traveling together, kind of, but they were two.
Yeah. Like informally
Exactly.
just sharing the road. Yeah. Or
Exactly.
yeah, not the road, sharing the direction.
The direction,
Yeah.
the dirt path. And so Thomas, Alice, and the two little girls, they were part of this company. They would have been assigned a handcart and loaded their 17 pounds per person into the back of this wagon. They were not allowed to carry their own food. There was a specific food wagon. Food was very strictly
Yeah. Controlled
rationed.
monitored.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Controlled, rationed.
Mm.
Understandably so, because that you have to be able to get there and so forth. The story that I was told growing up, and I have visited the memorial site, Martin's Cove is what it's called now in
Hmm.
Wyoming. And I'll get to that part of the story in a minute. I visited there with my kids and my former mother-in-law several years ago. And it is a beautiful part of the country. We were there in July, not
Mm.
in the middle of winter. It's beautiful. They have a visitor center there. They have a path where you can pull a real hand cart, and I have cute
Mm,
pictures of my kids who were like elementary school age, and they're pulling
mm,
these hand
mm,
carts around. It within Mormonism, it is a very faith promoting story. Story is told in such a way as, people were doing the best that they could. There
mm,
were some mistakes that were made. They were trying. They were told that it was probably too late for them to leave and get
mm.
there before the snow. They were just so anxious to get to Zion. And it wasn't, it wasn't the wisest decision that the company made.
Yeah,
And it's really unfortunate, but listen, they were so faithful. They were
yeah,
so faithful, and we
yeah.
just honor them so much.
Portraying it all as risky but reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to refer people to, there's an episode of Mormon Stories
Hmm.
where it's a John Larson episode,
Yeah, I remember the episode.
and I've gone back and listened to it several times, and he does a fantastic job of talking about the whole story, like the
Yeah,
details that are left out
yeah.
when you're told the faithful perspective. And he references this book, which I purchased, Devil's Gate, Brigham Young and the Great Mormon Handcart Tragedy by David Roberts. No,
Hmm.
I have not yet read it, but I did buy it because I was really anxious to read it, especially after I realized that this family, the Eccles family that we
Hmm.
descend from, were there. I was like, I
Yeah.
didn't realize, like, really, until I stumbled upon this story, I was like, I didn't, like, I visited the visitor center several years ago. When I was there, I didn't think we had any ancestors that had been there, but I
Hmm.
was totally wrong. Anyway, for the sake of time, I'm not going to attempt, and besides, I didn't prepare to do it. I'm not going to attempt to tell every detail. But basically, what happened is that these two, and again, there were two more that nobody ever talks about, but this group of handcart companies, when they were outfitted in Iowa City, they did not have what they needed. The wood was green. They had to build their own. The handcarts were not ready for them, like they would have been told, because this perpetual immigration fund was supposed to like cover the expensive things, and things were supposed to be ready for them so that they could go over. That was the whole agreement, right?
Hmm.
They got to Iowa City and the handcarts were not built, and so then they had to build them. They only had green wood. They didn't have the right kind of wood, and so they weren't strong. They weren't built correctly. They were told, and I'm not going to get the details right. Again, I refer people to that episode of Mormon Stories with John Larson, and then also this book, because that's where he got his information. There was something about the mileage in regard to how far they were told they had to go every day in order to get there in a certain time period, and the mileage was completely off, like short, like 300 miles or something. It
Hmm.
was
Yeah,
ridiculous how off it was. Okay.
yeah.
And there were, I want to say Willard Richards, but it might have been like Franklin Richards. I can't remember his name, and I apologize, but there was a church leader. He was an apostle. He came through in his wagon company at a certain point pretty early on in the trek across the country, stopped and spent some time with the company. They had very, very, very few supplies and resources, and yet he wanted them to slaughter one of their cows so that he could eat beef. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like, and so like he even took some of a major, I mean, I'm sorry, a cow.
Yeah.
They had so few supplies to get across the country. He had a horse and wagon. He had
Hmm.
a small company that could just go quickly. There were no children, there were no pregnant women, there were no, any of that. And he took some of the few supplies that they had. John Larson talked in that episode, he talked about how Brigham Young had, I mean, he had built he was quite wealthy at that point. Like, yes, he was as impoverished as anybody else when they first went into the state 10 years earlier, but he had built the Lion House. He was building the Beehive House. Like he had houses all over the state. He had, I mean, and he was bringing in revenue. He had
Hmm.
wineries. He had, the church had money, but they were offering people to come without being responsible about making sure they were safe.
Right.
And they had the money to do it, but they weren't making it a priority. They were neglectful to the point of people dying. That is never told as part of this story. So eventually what happened is, they got caught in the winter weather. They left late enough in the season that by the time the weather started turning, and if anybody's ever been in Nebraska and then especially Wyoming in October,
Hmm.
November,
Hmm.
it is brutal.
Yeah.
The snowstorms that come through can sometimes be unexpected, and it is debilitating for people with cars. Can you
Yeah.
imagine how
Yeah.
debilitating it would have been for people in the 80s with handcarts? A lot of people died. A lot of people froze to death. A lot of people starved to death. They would come to a stopping point after having pulled their handcarts through the wind and snow and be so exhausted then that when they were pulling like their tents out, their big canvas, where they would be sleeping, they would simply lay them on the ground and crawl underneath them, huddle up with whomever else was around to stay warm and sleep that way. And the canvas tents were frozen that way in the morning, covered in snow, and they would literally have to like climb, claw, dig their way out. And inevitably, not everyone woke up the next morning. People were waking up next to their dead family members. I have thus far not found anything specific to Thomas, Alice, Mary Ann, and Martha. I don't know what their specific experiences were. I haven't found it. It might be around, but I haven't stumbled upon it as I've been reading through things. But we can only assume that they experienced the worst of it like everyone
Mhm.
else did.
Yeah, there's no reason to think that they wouldn't have. No reason
There's
to
no
think they would have been
possibility.
sheltered from those experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's no possibility that they
Hmm. Hmm.
like not experienced it. Let's talk about trauma. Little Mary Ann, because that's the
Yeah.
focus of our story, 11 years old, and she has experienced this.
These two little English girls, probably with the loss of their sister fresh in their minds,
Very real. Yep.
probably having already come from a cold,
Yep.
foggy, smoggy, hostile environment, coming to a cold, wild environment, walking through the literal wilderness when they're not even teenagers yet.
Not even teenagers yet. Yeah. So we get through this. Give me a second. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I want to see if I can find, before I pull it up again, there is another, and maybe I'll just read it. This is an example what this person who wrote this history that we were just reading, this is an example of the rose-colored glasses. This is all she says. Handcart Company records provide valuable lists of people who migrated to Salt Lake City. Thomas Eccles came west with the Edward Martin Handcart Company. This company arrived in Salt Lake City on Sunday, November 30th, 1856. History tells a touching story about the conditions of these people on arrival.
A touching story.
That's all that's written. This in this person's history of the events.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean that's just one example. Now there's other places where it's that story is described in more detail, but not that I have found. And if there's somebody out there that knows otherwise, I would love to hear more details. And
Yeah.
maybe it's here and I just haven't stumbled upon it yet, but I haven't seen any specific stories to this family, but there's enough records to book about it, but this oftentimes is how the stories were passed down because
Mhm.
heaven forbid they should talk about it not working. God's plan, which Brigham Young's plan, it's the same thing as God's plan, right? Following God's plan put us in a position where, like, it's amazing that none of this little family passed away, especially the
Yeah.
little girls.
Seriously.
It's amazing they did not freeze to death.
Yeah.
They likely were just these skinny little things coming from England anyway, right?
Mhm.
These
Mhm.
are not like hardy children that have been grown up on the farm with plenty to eat and
Yeah.
whatever. It's these
Yeah.
are these are factory girls. So anyway, this is what this person says next. Brigham Young said that afternoon church services would be dispensed with for the rest of the day in order to take these dear souls into their homes, which I do think that happened. He instructed the people in Salt Lake City, this company is coming in. There's so many more details, and I'm not getting all of them, but I do. If people are interested, please do
Mm.
research and read. There's so much more to this. But he did ask the saints of Salt Lake City
Mhm.
to open their homes and invite these immigrants that were frostbite and emaciated, and their conditions were much more than touching, right? Like
Yeah.
they were
Yeah.
they hell, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so it says, take these dear souls into their homes, give them good solid food, let them bathe, and give them beds to rest in and recover from their
Mhm.
ordeal.
I can't help but notice that having the members board these fresh arrivals is probably the cheapest way to put them up.
Don't suspect that those families were given extra funds from the church in order to,
Right.
they didn't have very much
And
either.
they were not allowed to stay in hotels, or they did not have.
They didn't have hotels for one, right?
Okay, so at that point, the Salt Lake was not well built up enough.
No, no, it
Okay.
still would have been very I don't know, primitive. I mean,
Okay.
that's 10
Okay.
years in, but I don't think they had what we would consider hotels. I don't
Okay.
think that's a good question. I'm assuming not, but maybe somebody can answer that for us. I don't know.
Yeah.
But either way,
Yeah.
definitely the people were asked to
Mhm.
care for them. Yeah.
And I'm sure that they were not compensated from church funds for
I don't.
food they ate, for, yeah.
Yep, exactly. So anyway, the people there were asked to house them.
Mhm.
The next thing this person says in particular is Thomas Eccles and others were called and set apart as colonizers to the Santa Clara, Utah area. Now, I want to take a step back for a minute because this is a detail that is never told in this family story, but I was
Mhm.
able to make a connection when I was doing research on the man that Mary Ann eventually marries. His father, so Mary Ann, she's only 11, her future father-in-law and future brother-in-law were two of the rescuers that went out and helped rescue the Willie and Martin Handcart Company. I don't know if that led to Mary Ann and the rest of the Eccles family meeting the man
Mhm.
she would eventually marry. There might not be any connection. I just thought that was really fascinating because
Mhm.
that has nothing to do, at least I thought initially had nothing to do with Mary Ann, like the rest of the events of her life. But when I stumbled upon that information, I was like, I mean, it says here that Thomas Eccles and others were called and set apart to be part of it. Was eventually called the Cotton Mission. Uh,
Mhm.
Brigham Young sent people out to colonize, and it was a commandment. Like, and this is what I'm talking about when I said they get to Utah, and then Brigham Young tells you what to do. You don't really have a choice.
Mhm.
You don't get to stay in Salt Lake City where there's already a community built. There
Mhm.
was literally nothing in southern Utah. And you and I grew up visiting our grandparents in southern Utah. Of course,
Mhm.
when we went, there were communities and everything, but imagine that
Yeah.
landscape with nothing built yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No,
that's where, go ahead.
yeah, that's even today, that is hostile territory.
Absolutely.
Just the landscape is not conducive to human life at all. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I don't, Brigham Young ordered them down there. I don't know if there was any kind of conversation between Edward. So Edward Robinson is Mary Ann's future father-in-law, but she was only
Mhm.
11 at this point. I don't know if there were conversations between Thomas Eccles and Edward Robinson. And, Brigham Young's talking about starting this cotton mission in the southern Utah. There was also an iron mission that people had already settled. There were Indian missionaries, is what they called them. There was another, they called it the Muddy Mission. That's another story, but there were several missions that were established in southern Utah where Brigham Young was trying to colonize and spread Mormonism. It was hostile territory. It was a scary area, a scary time, and that's where they were sent. I don't know if there was any influence from Edward Robinson saying, "Hey, my son lives down in that area." I don't know if there was any connection made. I don't know. I don't know.
Mhm.
This says, okay. So Thomas Eccles and others were called and set apart as colonizers to the Santa Clara, Utah area. However, some confusion in the record dates. Some confusion in the record dates. Oh, I'm sorry. In the record, they don't have good punctuation. Some confusion in the record dates their call to the Cotton Mission before the mission opened. So this person's a little confused because the dates don't quite add up.
Mhm.
Also, it dates the call, meaning the call down there, for the Handcart Company. So they're just going into some of the inconsistencies in the records. Okay, so now it's talking about Brigham Young sent colonists down there during the spring of 1857. Give me one second. There's this, but then there's also, I need to find the right, there's a place where it explains something specific that I want to talk about. All right, that's not going to give the information that I need. So I'm just going to explain what happened. So they go down to southern Utah. They are connected with a man down there who he's a single man. He has a home. He's a farmer. He's a rancher. He's, all these things. His name is David Tullis. Okay. He matters. So remember that, David
Mhm.
Tullis. This is the spring of 1857. And I'm not expecting you to remember those dates, like the year 1857, Southern Utah. But I'll just ask you, does that jump out at you? Southern Utah, 1857. Is that how you?
No, nothing stands
Okay.
out as significant.
So I'm going to tell you this information through, let me look something up really fast and then I'll share my screen again. Wait. So it's been pretty traumatic thus far, but we're just wait. Okay, where are you at? I should have find where I'm at. Okay, well, let me share my screen. So the year, Southern Utah, 1857 isn't ringing a bell. Does this ring a bell?
Well, of course.
Massacre at Mountain Meadows.
Yeah. I mean, this is almost certainly the most famous atrocity uh, committed by the Mormons. Yeah, I mean, I won't even hedge that at all. Certainly committed by the Mormons.
Oh, it was 100%. Yeah.
Yeah,
If there are those
yeah.
listening and you've never heard about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, there are some really incredible books about it. I've
Mm.
read several. Juanita Brooks was pretty much the initial historian that wrote about
Mm.
the Mountain Meadows Massacre. She descended from one of the militiamen that was responsible.
Yeah.
There's a really incredible story about when she was a young school teacher in 1919. A very elderly man from the community named Nephi Johnson approached her one day. She was a school teacher in this small southern Utah community, and he approached her one day after she let the children out from school and sat down with her and said, I want to talk about some things. I think you're the person for me to tell the story to. She was young, she was busy, she was, you know, and she didn't immediately commit and was kind of like, maybe someday at some point. She was busy. She wasn't thinking, she was young. She was like 22, right?
Yeah.
And she would later say that that moment was her biggest regret of her life because Nephi Johnson was he was there. He was one of the main people. He was young when it happened. He was an Indian, and that word is not an appropriate word when we're talking about like native populations today, but that is the word they used at the time. So
Mm.
when I say Indian, I'm just saying what they would have said back then. He was called an Indian interpreter. He did know the local Paiute language, and
Mm.
he was like 18, 19, 20. He was quite young at the time, being ordered by the senior men in his community who were the head of the militia, but also they were the bishops and they were the local community.
Yeah.
He didn't claim to not have committed some of the atrocities. When you look at the story, Nephi Johnson he followed orders, but there are pretty specific signs of him trying to mitigate what was happening.
Mm.
So it's not that he wasn't guilty. What's interesting to me about this story about when he was an old man, the year 1919, trying to get this young school teacher to like listen to his stories, he wanted to talk about it. He was old. He knew he was going to die. He wanted the story to be told because the
Yeah.
community was not talking about this
Mm.
mass murder that had happened in their
Mm.
backyard. Side piece of information, a completely separate family than the one we're talking about that we also descend from. The ancestor's name was William Jasperson. He had two wives. Again, we're going to get into polygamy. His second wife was Nephi Johnson's niece. She's not the woman we descend from. We descend from the first wife, but you will find as we're talking about these stories that everybody is connected. So that's just an interesting detail that like I learned about Mountain Meadows Massacre. I'd heard the name Nephi Johnson a lot. And then when I'm learning about this completely separate family, I see that the second wife, her maiden name is Johnson. I click on her father and oh my gosh, he's the older brother of this Nephi Johnson that I'd been learning about when I'd been learning about the Mountain Meadows Massacre. So it's just an example of how like Mormons back in that time period, everybody's connected. That's it. Okay, so I'm again like with the handcart companies. I'm not going to go into all the details of the massacre. I do invite people to research it on your own. There are some really incredible books that I highly recommend. The one that I read most recently was the book about the aftermath of the Mountain Meadows Massacre called Vengeance is Mine. I cannot recommend like those books. This guy here, Richard Turley, is one of the writers. It's worth learning about. This is not something I ever knew about until I left the church. The church
Hmm.
does not talk
Yeah.
about these.
Never mentioned it. Yeah.
I never, and I thought I knew Mormon history. I
Hmm.
was never told that an entire community of Mormon men from an area of southern Utah where I grew up visiting my grandparents committed an absolute atrocity, like literally massacred 120 fellow Americans. They
Yeah.
were
Unarmed people. Yeah.
well, I mean, they were armed because they were crossing the plains, but well, you are right.
They disarmed them
They disarmed them. You are
before they executed them.
before they executed,
And
and it was a trick.
they promised them that they would be safe if they surrendered their arms. And so the settlers did, and then they executed them. So it wasn't a fight. It wasn't
It
a battle.
it was not a fight. And when investigators from the federal government came in later, and of course we're talking about out in the middle of nowhere in 1857 and then 1858. Like the Mormons didn't even bury their bodies. And so
Yeah.
when the investigators from Washington, D.C., that the federal government assigned to come and look into this, because the relatives of these people in Arkansas were writing to their officials in Washington saying, we can't find our relatives. They'd never made it to California. Help us, kind of a thing. The story got out because there were people who knew what happened who did make it to California, which is where
Mm.
this immigrant company was going. And so it was pretty quick that I believe it was the San Francisco newspaper. Again, 1850s, everything's pretty rural, pretty primitive is the word I'm looking for. But there was a newspaper in San Francisco that picked up on the story. Before you know it, the story's in Washington, D.C. And it's not, I mean, it didn't stay secret very long.
Yeah.
And so anyway, government officials from Washington, D.C. sent investigators, but they weren't there until the next summer. But they found skeletons that still had long hair attached to the skull, which communicated a woman, with the skeleton of a child like a baby in her arms. There were skeletons of what surely were teenage girls that were maybe 200 yards away from everybody else, and it was clear that they were running away.
Yeah.
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 So
It was not a battlefield.
it was a massacre.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not going to go into all the details. I invite anybody who's listening to look it up and like really read about it.
Mhm.
But this is what happened in September of 1857. So backtrack a couple months. Thomas and Alice Eccles and their little girls, who at this point are, probably, well, this is, okay, so let me actually back up a little bit. The Eccles family was housed in Salt Lake City for several months.
Mhm.
And then in the early spring of 1857, they were sent down to southern Utah to settle what would eventually become what was called the Cotton Mission, Santa Clara area. And initially they were housed by a man named David Tullis, okay? He was a bachelor. He was a man who was not married. I think he was in his early 30s, I think late 20s, early 30s. I don't know why they were housed with him, but maybe he was a single man and he had room. I don't know. Maybe the local leaders were like, hey, live here for now, kind of a thing. This is the spring of 1857. In September of 1857 is when this massacre happened. And when I'm just going to scroll all the way down to the bottom because Tullis starts with a T. This is a list of sorry, it's not coming up. There's a lot of footnotes. Pardon the footnotes. Where are we at? Okay. When you look through the list of massacre participants or members of the militia that they were able to identify as having participated. Everybody kept it a secret. Nobody would talk about it. Everybody claimed I wasn't actually there. That person said I was there, but I wasn't. It was very confusing. Juanita Brooks, the fact that because she didn't immediately interview Nephi Johnson when he approached her in 1919. She waited and she heard that he was very ill and she tried to go out to his ranch kind of far away. She was like, I need to do this. He died. Like she never was able to interview Nephi Johnson. And she regretted it just deeply, like she was like, that was so dumb. And over the years, because she got married, she had children, that experience never left her. and she lived among the children of the perpetrators. This was something that was whispered in her community her entire life. Of course, she was born much afterward. Like she didn't have any immediate connection. She didn't do it. She didn't have any immediate connection, but she'd heard the whispers her whole life about this thing and had been told, well, the Native Americans had, killed these people or whatever, but there were whispers about it not being them. She determined, I'm going to find out the truth. So she starts interviewing all of these elderly people in her community who many of them were, some were still alive. Some, it was just the children of what happened, of the people that committed the crime. But if she had not been brave enough to ask the hard questions of the very people who had committed the crime, who had never been, never received justice for it, the thing that the community did not want to talk about, if she had not had the courage to stand up really to her community and say, no, tell me what happened, we wouldn't have the information we have today about what happened in Mountain Meadows Massacre. Like, she's a hero, she's an absolute hero. She was never excommunicated, but she was definitely ostracized from Mormonism because of it. And it was refused for her to access some of the records that we now, that like, the recent book that I read about Mountain Meadows Massacre, the church did give them access to those records all these years later, but when it was still within the lifetime of some of the people that had committed the crime, the church would not give Juanita Brooks access to those records. Like, she's a real hero. Anyway, I can't remember why I went on that tangent, but the reason why is because people were hiding and lying about what happened and who was involved. And so really, like, we have Juanita Brooks to thank in large measure. So right here on the list of people who participated in the massacre is the man that our ancestors were living with, okay? So it gives us an understanding of who he was, okay? This is what it says: David Wilson Tullis. David worked for Jacob Hamblin. For those who are familiar with Mormon history, Jacob Hamlin is somewhat famous amongst stories. He was like, and again, the word Indian, I'm using the word they would have used back then. He was an Indian agent. I think he was a translator. There are a lot of famous stories about Jacob Hamlin. David Tullis worked for Jacob Hamlin at his ranch at Mountain Meadows. Jacob Hamlin had a ranch at these meadows, okay? During September 1857, on Saturday, September 5th, Tullis met a couple of people, Benjamin Arthur, Josiah Reeves, Elliot Wilden, who reported that the immigrants' quote unquote sauciness, and we're talking about this immigrant company from Arkansas in Cedar City. So people were talking about how, like, these immigrants from Arkansas were just saucy. Like, I mean, they're just like, they were annoyed by them, right? Tullis would later direct members of the Arkansas Company, meaning the immigrants, to the south end of the meadows to camp. So he was involved in the deception, telling the immigrants where to go to camp. Tullis admitted being close enough to hear gunfire during the week of the siege, but that's all he admitted to. He said he also saw Indians, right, what they would have called them, Indians and militiamen, traveling along the road toward the immigrant camp, and that's all he admitted to. There were 17 children who survived, most of them under the age of 8, but there's some debate there. 6-year-old Rebecca Dunlap, who was one of the surviving children, who had witnessed her family, her parents, everybody that they'd been traveling with for months and months and months. She witnessed all of it, 6 years old, witnessed them being massacred. So one of the surviving children, 6-year-old Rebecca Dunlap, identified what she called an Englishman named Tullis as having murdered one of her parents. David Tullis, he was actually from Scotland, 6 years old. That's, she said an Englishman named Tullis, which added to the validity of what she was saying. She was little, but she said he's an Englishman. His name's Tullis. He murdered one of my parents. So it adds some validity there. According to Albert Hamlin, who was Jacob Hamlin's adopted Native American son, okay? According to Albert Hamlin, Tullis transported the surviving children to Hamlin's ranch after the massacre. And there's a whole story about so Jacob Hamlin was not at home when all of this happened. He was up in Salt Lake City marrying his second wife. His first wife, Rachel, was at home at the ranch, just doing what pioneer women do, taking care of the home, the ranch, the children, all the things. And when David Tullis, who worked for her husband, drives a wagon up to the home, because it was the closest home to the Meadows. And in the back of the wagon are screaming, bloody, terrified children. He loads these children into her home. She has no, I mean, she would have heard the gunfire and like all the stuff because it was close enough she would have heard it, not seen it, but heard it. I'm sure that was a bigger experience, like a louder experience that what she normally
Sure.
but she would have heard gunfire. She would have heard, that's people hunted, people, it wasn't that unusual, but I'm sure the screams and all the things but I can't imagine she would have known what was going on. Her husband would have known if he had been there, but he was gone.
Yeah.
She's just there at the ranch. So she hears all of that, and then this man who works for her husband shows up and with a wagon full of children. And she spends that night caring for 17 screaming children.
Okay. Do we know, is there any way of knowing what our ancestors would have witnessed?
No. So I'm telling this as to explain who David Tullis was. They lived with him, but his home was not right there. There is record that Thomas Eccles was in October, so a month later, October of 1857, there is a record of Thomas Eccles being in the militia.
Oh, okay. So this was the father of our
Yeah, Mary Ann.
Mary Ann. Yeah.
He's
So
not
he
listed
was
he's not listed on the participants list, but
okay.
not everybody who participated is on here. There are people that were never identified that were there and participated.
Okay, so what's the list that he is mentioned on? Just a list of the militia?
Yeah, it's a separate list for 1857 list.
And that list comes from after the massacre.
Yes, it comes from after the massacre, but I'm unclear about when he became part of the militia.
Right. But we do know that he was there in that location before the massacre happened.
So they would have known, like that family. I'm not suggesting I haven't seen any evidence that he was a part of it. We don't know one way or the other. We just know that.
But it's possible that he was part of it.
Yes.
Okay, but there's no indication that he was.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Okay.
But I'm just laying the groundwork for what was happening around this family. Okay.
Okay.
So again, two little girls, their parents promised Zion, promised this, utopian paradise, whatever, and they find themselves tangentially.
Yeah, it's very possible that they were at home doing their normal duties, their normal, chores when a wagon load of screaming, bloody children arrived.
So let me take a step back. That wagon load arrived at the Hamblin Ranch. David Tullis took that wagon of children to the Hamblin Ranch, not to his own home.
Okay, so he did not live at the Hamblin Ranch.
Here's the thing. I thought he did. I read somewhere else that he was living at the Hamblin Ranch at the time.
Okay.
And another record said that this Eccles family lived with David Tullis in his home. So there's
no mention where his home was.
I don't know where it's at. I have not found where it's at. Somebody might know. But
okay.
I don't know.
Well, why don't we think that it was there at the Hamlin Ranch?
It might have been.
Okay.
Maybe he had a home close by. That's what I'm trying to get at. Like, these are some of the details that I don't know. And I would love to know them. If somebody out there knows, I would love to know. Because again, when we're talking about generational trauma, I wanna access this information, because it matters. When we're talking about generational trauma, it matters what Mary Ann experienced.
Yeah.
It does. It just matters. Okay. So I just wanted to set that up, and then we need to move on, especially time-wise. So that is something that I'm not saying they experience. Let's just talk about Mary Ann. Surely Mary Ann was not at the Meadows, whether or not her father was, but that is what was happening in that community. And they lived with was there. So that's just some background. That's just, little Mary Ann, that is what was happening around her in southern Utah. We're going to fast forward just a little bit. Somewhere in there, Thomas and Alice have another baby. So they have another baby girl. So baby number 4, but of course, Margaret had passed away earlier. So they have another little girl. They have 3 little girls.
Yeah.
Anne would have been at this point 12, 13. Margaret, I'm sorry, finish. And then they have this little baby girl that Alice, they named her Alice. So I'm going to call her Alice Jr. Okay. So they have this baby. They farmed. They were still very poor. The girls still had to work help. Mary Ann was started working at a local dairy. That's what it was, a local dairy. And the dairy was owned by a man named Richard Robinson. Richard Robinson was married to a woman named Elizabeth. They had, several children. That's where Mary Ann worked when in 1860, so it's a couple years later, her father, Thomas, passes away. And it said he passed away of appendicitis. I don't know how they could tell if it was appendicitis back then. I'm assuming that a lot of things were called appendicitis, whether or not it was.
Mhm.
No, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what, I don't know. But so let's here. I'm going to stop sharing this. Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing this. And then I want to pull up Mary Ann. So let's go back. Okay. So let me share my screen again. Okay. So are you seeing Mary Ann Eccles?
Yeah.
So the year is 1860. Keep in mind she was born in 1844. So that makes her 16, right? 15 or 16, depending upon the time of year. When we scroll down, so her father died in 1860. Let's scroll down until we find. She was married in March of 1860 to Richard Robinson. She was not yet 16. She was 15 years old.
So she was married at 15.
Yes.
Okay.
She became a polygamous wife in the weeks after her father died. Now, we don't know how Thomas felt about polygamy. I do know that for the most part, English converts were told that the rumors about Mormons practicing polygamy was a lie.
Yeah.
And so what their reaction may have been getting to Utah after the horrendous ordeal where they barely survived in the Martin Handcart Company. They were sent down to southern Utah where they hardly a paradise. They had to start over. And it becomes reality real fast that polygamy is a real thing. Okay. I don't know this, and maybe I'm viewing it through a lens that is too cynical. I just find it rather disturbing that 15-year-old Mary Ann is married weeks after her father dies.
Yeah.
That very much feels predatory, like
Yeah.
advantage of. And it makes me wonder because they were there for 3 years before her dad passed away. Did he, in that time period, refuse to take a second wife? Because this is the height of the Mormon Reformation when church leaders were telling men, you will not receive your salvation unless you marry a plural wife. Thomas, I mean, he had another baby with his wife Alice, but he didn't take a second wife. Does that tell us that he was against polygamy, or maybe it just hadn't happened yet? I don't know. I'm making assumptions, but it just feels like I just look at it and I'm like, he didn't take a polygamous wife in those 3 years. He could have. And then he dies of appendicitis. I don't know that anything nefarious happened. It's just 15-year-old Mary Ann is married to a 30-whatever-year-old man within weeks of her father not being there to protect her anymore.
Well, yeah, and the fact that it happened within weeks suggests that it suggests desperation.
Yeah, right. And it may be that it's not anything nefarious. Maybe Alice looked around at her situation and this is what's happening. She doesn't have the resources to provide for her children.
Yeah.
And the boss at Mary Ann's work says to Alice one day, I'll take care of your daughter.
Yeah.
I marry her. Alice wants Mary Ann to be able to eat. So it may be that. It may not be predatory. It may not be something nefarious. It may have just been desperation.
Yeah, but even then, I mean, we've certainly listened to discussions that are done I guess in an attempt to refute the old Mormon claims that polygamy happened as a sort of welfare for needy women.
Yeah. Benevolent.
We know that wasn't really true, that there were other methods people could use, right?
And I remember Lindsay Hansen Park talking about a situation like this one day, and a man was saying, well, if I hadn't married that young woman, like she would have starved. And Lindsay Hansen Park said, why didn't you feed her then?
Yeah.
Why didn't you just get her like service, like social services? Why didn't you do something else? Did you have to marry her?
Yeah.
That wasn't the answer.
Yeah. Like increase her pay a bit.
Right.
Yeah. If the guy's a factory owner or a factory foreman or, something like that, there's certainly other methods that could have been done if you saw, oh, the family of one of my workers is in need.
Yep.
Let me, funnel a little bit of extra help that way. That's what an altruistic person would do. So, and again, knowing what we know about the average marriage age and what was considered culturally acceptable at the time, which was that, age 20 was the norm for a young woman. Again,
And
opting to marry a 15-year-old.
yeah, yeah, he was he was 30 because he was born
Yeah.
in 1930.
And the young woman, not even a young woman, the teenager, feeling like that was the only choice she had.
Right.
Because she certainly
So
wouldn't have done it, if her home situation was secure,
yeah,
right? If she felt like, I have a few more years, living at home before, I can consider suitors, knowing that, I mean, she would have known better than anybody when women get married.
yeah, right.
And for her to say, no, I have to do this now, yeah.
So when we talk about trauma, I don't pretend to have ever experienced anything like that, but I do believe that there is trauma that comes from having to make lifelong decisions out
Mm.
of powerlessness and desperation.
Yeah.
The like she was so powerless.
Well, yeah. Yeah. And I'm reminded of how worried historians can become about presentism. And so many of the post-Mormon people out there who have these discussions are constantly accused of and therefore worry about having a presentist perspective. But human nature doesn't change that. I mean, it certainly doesn't change from 100 years ago.
Trauma presents in the body the same now as it did
Mm.
then.
Yeah. And how you and I can look back at this time, even with, I'm not even sure how to say it, even with empathy for how their lives would be different from ours today. I don't think it requires much justification to say that how a 15-year-old girl today would feel about being in a desperate situation and having a man propose to her when she's 15. How we think about that today cannot be significantly different than how she would have thought about it at the time. And yeah, maybe kids then had more self-sufficiency. Maybe they had more survival skills than, pampered kids do today. But again, I still don't think the difference is that much. So yeah, again, there are going to be so many accusations of, taking a presentist perspective. I don't think it is.
Not for this in
Yeah.
particular. I don't think so either. I don't think so either. We're going to pivot just for a second and talk about Mary Ann's mother and her two younger sisters. Because of
Mhm.
course Mary Ann is married and so she doesn't live with them anymore, but the community is very tight knit. So I'm going to pivot and talk about what happened to them. And then we're going to jump to the end of Mary Ann's life. There are some other things that I think, and I'll just do some administrative thing due to time, because the other story that is important to tell in conjunction with this is the story about Richard Robinson and where he comes from and what led to him being him. But I think we need to do that another day. And the piece that Brian Buchanan is helping me research is part of that story, not part of what we're going to get to today. But we'll pause that and that will finish up this story. But I want to at least talk about Alice, Mother Alice, Martha, and young Alice is really, I mean, she's not a significant part of the story that I'm going to be telling, but she's there.
Mhm.
And then tell you the conclusion of Mary Ann's life. So there's two things I'm going to touch on before we're done for today. In the meantime, so Mary Ann, she's married to Richard Robinson. You can see down here, her first baby is born a year later. Talk about trauma. That baby died
Mhm.
the next year. Her next child, born in 1863. This is our grandmother's grandfather. So
So this is,
this is
uh,
Beverly's grandfather.
okay.
So he's the one that we descend from. There's nothing about his story right now that I'm going to be telling, but she does eventually have a lot of children with Richard. Okay. So they have a lot of children together. I'm not going to touch on any of them today, but I'm just sharing that. So Mary Ann is married to Richard Robinson, 1860. She starts having children immediately. Her father has passed away. She still has, of course, her mother and two younger sisters. So now we're going to talk about Alice for a minute. This, of course, let's see, I'm scrolling down. Of course, she was married to Thomas Eccles and had several children. And then look who she marries.
Okay.
She married David Tullis, the man that they had been living with. Okay.
And so, okay, looking at these dates, I think I'm confused here. We're looking at David Wilson Tullis Sr.
Yeah. Uh-huh. The man that took
Uh-huh.
a wagon full of children to Rachel Hamblin's house that were screaming,
Uh-huh.
bloody and crying. He was a participant in the massacre. The Eccles family lived with him when they initially went down to that area. Her husband dies in 1860. A couple weeks later, Mary Ann Eccles, the oldest daughter, our ancestor. She's married to Richard Robinson, and this is like a year and a half later. So I don't know everything that's happening. A year and a half later, Alice remarries and she marries David Tullis, who's 11 years younger than her, which is interesting.
Okay, that's what I was confused about because this
Yeah.
whole time I've been thinking that David Tullis was older than Alice.
No, he's younger.
But he's younger. Okay,
The
so
whole
and so
time
this
he was
is
younger.
David Wilson is a man. I'm sorry, David Tullis is a man who we know was at the Meadow Mass the yeah, the Mountain Meadows Massacre.
We know.
We know he was there.
Now, I can only assume that he would have perpetuated the same story everybody else did, that it was the quote unquote,
Yeah.
and that he helped rescue the children, or he helped, I'm sure that he was telling a story that was not true, but it doesn't change the fact that this is the man that Alice marries. I suspect she didn't know that he had committed these heinous crimes. I don't know, but I assume she didn't know. There weren't, again, did she remain single and try to care for her two younger daughters for a time? And they need to eat. I don't know. I don't know what
Yeah.
the circumstances are, but she
Yeah.
marries David Tullis. He's 11 years younger. He was actually quite old for that time period for a man to not be married. Like he was already above 30.
Hmm.
He had not married before. Why?
Hmm.
Who knows? I don't know. So Alice marries him. The next year, it might not show, but the next year give me a minute. Let me see if I can figure out the best way to show the next piece of information. Oh, it does show. Okay. So Thomas Eccles Tullis was born to the couple the next, 1863. Okay. So a little more than a year later, they
Hmm.
have a baby together that they name after her first husband. And the things that I read, they talked about how back then, when it came to families being sealed together, she would have already been married to her first husband. I don't know if they were officially sealed in the temple, but that would have been the intention. And so this baby, according to the theology, would have been Thomas's son, not David's, because of the sealing to the first husband or whatever. And for whatever reason, David Wilson Tullis was comfortable with them naming him Thomas Eccles Tullis, and in theory, he would, in the eternities, belong to Alice and Thomas Eccles, not to him. It was just the theology, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
So Thomas Eccles Tullis is born in 1863. I believe it was January. Okay. Oh, he was born in March. Forgive me. He was born in March. Okay. I'm imagining Alice, she's recovering from childbirth. This is March 1863. As I was looking through and kind of trying to figure out the dynamics of all these different people, and I would click on this person or that person. At one point, I clicked on Martha, Mary Ann's sister that's 3 years younger, just kind of curious about her. And scrolling through, just different interesting things. And who does she marry? She marries David Wilson Tullis. So Martha Eccles, who is Alice's second daughter, well,
Uh-huh.
third, but the older one died. She's a teenager when her mother marries David Tullis, and they married. So this is when it gets real, okay? Her mother gave birth to her new baby brother in March of 1863. In August of 1863, March to August, David Tullis takes his teenage stepdaughter to Salt Lake City and gets sealed to her in the endowment house.
Okay. I mean, I've heard, from various podcasts, I've heard this kind of thing mentioned, but here it is in our own family record.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's I guess technically it's not pedophilia because you have to be not have gone through puberty for it to be technically categorized as that, but it is. She is his daughter.
Yeah.
He's living in his home as a
Hmm.
daughter, as a
Yeah.
stepdaughter.
Yeah.
It happened all the time.
Yeah.
It just did. So his two wives are mother and daughter. Okay, it gets worse. Give me a second. So let's scroll down. So their first baby, so they're married in August of 1863. Their first baby is born in 1864. Makes sense until you click on their first daughter's date of birth. They were married in August and she was born in February.
Okay. You need to
Connect the
clarify
dots.
that for me.
So
So who?
married in so David married his stepdaughter, sealed to her in Salt Lake City
uh
in the endowment house, August 1863. 6 months later, she gives birth to their first child.
Okay. So yeah, I didn't know who you were talking
Uh,
about. It was the mother or the daughter.
six
So
months later.
clearly he had started having sex with her before they were married, got her pregnant. So he's married to her mother
Yep.
and he's having sex with his former stepdaughter, I guess still at the time stepdaughter,
15-year-old stepdaughter.
15-year-old. Yeah.
Her mother just gave birth to a baby brother. She's recovering. So March 1863, she's recovering from childbirth. And what is her husband doing?
Yeah, he's having sex with yeah, the biological daughter of the man who he has just had another child with. Of the woman he's just had another child with. So, okay.
I am telling you, Nate, when I stumbled upon this information, I think I was filled with rage for days
Hmm.
and days.
Yeah.
Let's talk about trauma.
Yeah.
Well, Martha is not our direct ancestor, but she's Mary Ann's little sister.
Well,
I don't,
there's zero chance that Mary Ann was oblivious to any of this going on. I mean, her mother and her sisters would have.
Mary Ann lived in the community. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know how far away. She did not live in the same house, but she lived in the community.
And even if they had been hesitant to tell her, she would have intuited something's up anytime she spoke with them. She would have known about it.
A 15-year-old who is 3 months pregnant. There's no way she doesn't know at that point. She has stopped having her period.
Yeah.
Body is starting to change. Why don't we get in the wagon and drive to Salt Lake City and we'll make you an honest woman?
Yeah. Yeah.
He's sealed. Okay, this man who has committed murder, who has, we're going to call it rape because
Yeah.
she is not old enough to consent.
Yeah.
Again, this is not presentism.
Yeah.
This
Mm-mm.
is the psychology of a human being.
Yeah.
She is not old enough to consent. He is in a position of power over her.
Yeah.
He is her father figure. He is the man she and her mother and her sister rely on to live.
Yeah. Yeah. It's either be under his roof or be on the street. Not even the street, the dirt.
The dirt, the desert.
Yeah.
So that's Martha's story.
And so all of this experience, I mean, probably everything from the moment they stepped off an English boat until Mary Ann is married, living in the same town, watching this happen with her mother and her daughter. This was all her young life before she's even
She's not even
legally an
20.
adult.
She's not even 20 years old yet. Everything that we've discussed thus far, she has either witnessed or experienced. She isn't even 20 years old. Have I even really shown you a picture of Mary Ann yet? Let me pull her up. I'm going to show you this picture and then we're going to move on for the sake of time. And I'm going to tell you about the end of Mary Ann's life. And then we'll be done with this story and we'll tell Richard Robinson's story later. It is important to talk about his story. Let me go back to, actually, let me stop sharing and I might have her picture readily accessible. There were some things I did in early preparation, but I'm not sure what I did when. Hold on. Okay. Hold on one second. This is gonna minimize all these things. One second. Okay, well, let me pull this up. And so the picture's not great. It is a photograph. It's very old. I think the photograph was taken when she married Richard. I think she's a teenager in this photograph. It's
Okay.
one of the ones that we have. So let me share my screen. Can you see that?
It does look pretty young.
The whole picture, this shoulder here is Richard. I think she's a 15-year-old in this picture.
Yeah.
Am I reading into things? I don't know, but I look at her, she almost looks haunted.
Yeah. You know, that she looks, yeah. As I was interpreting her facial expression, I was I was wondering how much my interpretation is based on everything you've just told me.
Yes. But how can you not look at
Mhm.
her through that lens? That
Yeah.
is not, in this picture, she's 15. By the time her younger sister is pregnant by her stepfather and all of that's happening, she's not even 20.
Yeah.
All of the things that she experienced before she got married at the age of
Mhm.
15. Let's talk about trauma.
Yeah.
So, like, I've been really eager to tell you this story. It is so, I think maybe because I've been carrying it for months.
Mhm.
I didn't know this before maybe 3 or 4 months ago. I didn't know about her, but I don't know that there's been a day, definitely not a week that's gone by that I haven't thought about her since.
Mhm.
She is our third great grandmother. Let's talk about generational trauma. This is a story that never would have been told. This story cannot be told in the way that it needs to be through a faithful lens. We would never understand the trauma we inherited from her through the way that the corporate Mormon church tells its
Yeah.
history.
Well, it would be so fictionalized in a perversely positive way.
Is. We haven't had time for me to take you to some of those places, but I have seen places where people that have tried to write down this history have said things like about Martha, about, they were sealed in the temple in August of 1863, but we're pretty sure they had a civil ceremony 3 months before that.
Pretty
There's
sure.
no record. There's no
Yeah.
record of that. They're just saying
Oh.
that because they can see the dates just like I did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's those moments, and I will admit that I do become fatigued with how much leeway is given to the faithful versions of stories, or the faithful trying to tell these stories, because when does a faith promoting version start to become just a destructive lie? And when you truly have no evidence that she was married earlier,
Right.
and yet you're jumping through hoops to avoid telling the fact that
She was
the
being
man
raped.
who got her pregnant just became a father with her own mother, and he got her pregnant out of wedlock, which would have been interpreted so much more harshly at the time.
Yep.
And it's still pretty harshly interpreted today.
Yeah.
I get tired of the faithful telling of these stories.
And that's why I wanted to use that comparison earlier that I'm hesitant to because I don't want to claim that the trauma of the Mormon people compares to the Holocaust. It does not. But the denial of facts
Yeah.
is so harmful to the healing of subsequent generations.
Well, and I've been very aware of this just over the past several weeks and months. When you encounter enough false tellings of stories, when the real evidence for history is there, and when any human that attempts to be a morally decent human who then doesn't do their due diligence to really understand what actually happened. I get tired of cutting these people some slack, right? And I get tired of hearing, the presentism accusation. I get tired of hearing the like, well, we weren't there. We don't know what it was really like. It's like, well, but we have piles of evidence that you haven't examined,
Right.
piles of
Right.
evidence that you have not brought to the attention of your readers and listeners, piles of evidence that would make it very difficult for you to propose what you have proposed and still call yourself an honest person. And I get tired of cutting these people slack. And it really makes it hard for me to do what I want to do, which is to see people in a good light, to see people well,
And assume good attention.
and to assume good intentions among people, and to think things like, well, if they knew, they wouldn't say what they're saying, but they had the chance to know, and I attribute, I mean, I can put this back on all of our experiences, thinking back to all of our family members in the past who propagated the damage that the Mormon Church does. And I try to think, if they had known better, they would have done better. Well, how much should I say they should have known better? I think a lot of times they should have, and they could have, and they didn't.
And when you have to be loyal to the institution first,
Yeah.
it causes you to justify
Yeah. Yeah.
dishonesty.
Yeah.
Like you're not willing to call it dishonesty.
Yeah. Well, and I have been accused by friends of being exceptionally harsh and saying, when I say there are times when a person's religious background has not been the foundation of their moral compass, but in fact has prevented them from having one.
Yep.
And I'm called hateful,
Hmm.
right? Being a religion basher and condemning people for their faith. And my response is, well, a moral compass is a fairly innate human characteristic. And when people don't have one, we call those people psychopaths.
Right.
And so when you have a belief system that cripples your moral compass, what should we call those people?
Right.
So,
Yes, 100% agree. One more detail, and then we're going to wrap up. I have what I want to share ultimately on my screen, but there's another thing I want to share, so I'm going to see if I can find it on my phone really fast. Because I have the Family Search app on my phone. It's sometime finicky. Give me a second. Okay. Okay. So this is okay. Perfect. Let me go back and I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go through this last detail. Where am I? Share. Hold on a minute. Sorry. Okay. So we are going to click on the obituary, like the little newspaper clipping of
mhm,
Mary Ann's death. She died in 1906. So we are skipping a big chunk, but the main parts that I wanted to share, I have shared except for this last piece. So here is the newspaper article. Kind of hard to read, but we are gonna give it a go. Actually, it is transcribed down here, so I'm just gonna read it. July 3rd, 1900, funeral of Mrs. Mary Ann Robinson of this place was held at the meeting house yesterday. This is Kanab, Utah, 2 p.m. Mrs. Robinson died at the State Mental Hospital at Provo, July 20th of old age. She had been at the hospital 2 or 3 years. She is the wife of the late Richard S. Robinson of this place and leaves a big family of grown children. So
well,
after having, go ahead.
I mean, I wonder what the significance of state mental hospital is.
I'm about to tell you.
Okay.
After having learned everything that I learned and I stumble upon this, I'm like, wait, what? She died at a state mental hospital. And suddenly I'm like, it's only 1906. Like, what state mental hospital?
Yeah.
So give me a second. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to look something up and then share that. Give me a second. Let me share this. So this over here is the Utah State Mental Hospital. It was built in Provo, Utah in the 1880s.
Mm.
It was run and operated much like, well, let me backtrack. It was initially called, here we'll click on this one, the Utah Territorial Insane Asylum. And it was built in 1885. She died there in 1906. It was largely, I have done like this sent me into a spiral, okay? Because of my I have a daughter with severe disabilities. I've done a lot of research about the history of disability in America. History of disability and the history of mental illness in America cannot be separated from one another because
Mhm.
for a large part of our history up until recent years, there wasn't enough research, data, information. Science hadn't proven yet a lot of things, and doctors back then could not tell the difference between a disability and a mental illness.
Mhm. Mhm.
And a lot of these insane asylums slash, like institutions for the disabled, the people were intermixed. And the environment in these institutions was, give me a second. I'm gonna read to you what it was like. Hold on. I have an entire write-up on my business website about the history of disability in America. And I'm saying disability, and I want to reiterate, at the time, disability mental illness. There was no difference in how it was treated and how it was considered. Institutions were originally established in the mid-1800s as literally an asylum. The word asylum is a word that means a safe place, right? But it wasn't long before funding ran out in these places of, quote, secure retreat, which is the technical definition of the word asylum, when residents were referred to as inmates rather than pupils, right? So let me read a couple of things here about what these institutions were like. Again, institutions for the disabled and the mentally ill in large part were one and the same. Sometimes they claimed a difference, but they didn't know enough back then to actually differentiate between the two. And none of the above populations did this form of treatment serve well. Let me just put it that way. So it didn't take long for the expense of such institutions to drain available public funds. Efforts were made to economize and to make the institutions more self-sufficient. Despite their limited resources, many facilities attempted to maintain their integrity as places of compassionate care, but over time, most were not successful. And this specifically is about, children, because that's what I'm talking about in this write-up that I did for my website, but it applies to a lot of institutions, whether they were children or adults. In some locations, higher functioning children were used as free labor to work in laundries and on farms, but as overcrowding increased, supplies still ran low, and children within these institutions suffered from neglect. Stories were told about inmates sleeping on floors, rarely being bathed, seldom going outside, having inadequate nutrition and clothing, and spending almost every day in the same room. And then I go into detail about how many of them were afraid of their caretakers. Visits from family members were discouraged and at times outright denied. There was very little oversight, and what went on inside the institutions became shrouded in secrecy. These placements became standard practice by the late 1800s and continued for many decades into the 20th century. And then this particular write-up goes on to talk about how special education evolved, and because it's specifically about disability. But all of that applies to what were called insane asylums also. So when I stumbled upon this information and was like, what Utah insane asylum? And I looked up and I saw this building and I'm like, I've been to Provo. I've never seen this place. The Utah State Hospital is what it is now called. It's not even called a mental hospital today, but that is what it is. The Utah State Hospital still exists, but it is not this building, this gorgeous Victorian building, as oftentimes these institutions were. Has been torn down. It is not there anymore. But tail spinning after everything I've learned about her. And I'm like, why in the world was she committed to an insane asylum? Like my brain, right? I ordered various books about the insane asylum. I have another one here. This one, I want to reference something and I hope I can find it. I hope I have the tag in it really quick. It talks about, because I found her in this book, our ancestor, but not by name, but I know it's her. And the reason why is because she is listed. Give me a second. Let me see if I can find it. They have charts. I mean, this book is about year by, so this book is a report of the State Board of Insane Asylum Commissioners of the state of Utah for the biennial term ending November 30th, 2, and I was able to figure out that the time frame covered the time frame when she would have been admitted. And so I didn't even know this existed. I was like, I have to order this, right? I just, I had to know. So it talks about the food they bought, the peaches, and it talked about the curtain rods. I mean, it's a budget. Like this thing is a budget. Like how boring. Like I can't even believe they published this thing. But for me, trying to research my ancestor having been admitted to this institution, it was gold, right? And now okay, this is it. This is it. Elsewhere, I was able to find this when she entered. And there is a chart in here, and I want to see if I can find it. There's a chart in here. Oh, here it is. Okay. So there's a chart, it's page 65, if anybody cares, table 2, showing counties and numbers of patients from each county that were admitted to the insane asylum between December 1st, 1901 and November 30th, 1902. And it lists them by, male patients, female patients, and then the total number. And I don't know if this would have been this significant to anybody else, but I'm thinking about this Mary Ann that was this little girl that was in the William Martin Handcart company that, married off in a polygamous family at 15 and just all the trauma, right? And I find her county, and in that time frame, there's only one person from Kane County that was admitted to the hospital, and she is female, and it doesn't say her name, but I saw that number and like that's my ancestor.
Yeah.
This nameless number, one female. She was admitted to the insane asylum, and there she is. That's her.
Do we have any record that she moved elsewhere later in adulthood?
No, no, no. And I do know that she was living in King County. She was later buried in a cemetery in King County. I know that she was living in King
So
County.
there's no reason to think, there's no evidence that she moved to another county before she became elderly.
Yes. And again, because of time, I'm not actually pulling all these things up to show you because it's, we've been at this for several hours now, but I do know that. And let me pull up one other thing to read something to you, and then I'm going to tell you about information that I tracked down that is not on Family Search, that, as far as I know, unless other people out in the family are looking, it's not available information. Let me second. There we go. Okay. Oh, give me a second. Let me share my screen. Okay, so the last couple of paragraphs of this history that somebody else wrote specifically about Mary Ann. And again, I don't know, contributed by somebody named Ramona Ruth Newbold. But it doesn't mean she wrote it, just means that she had it and uploaded it. So it says this: those that remember Mary Ann through her married life say she was very retiring, never demanding. She was a frail, thin woman, had a very sad look on her face, and had very poor health. Her 10 children had been born without medical care, and only the help of Elizabeth could give her. Elizabeth was the first wife. I love Elizabeth, and I wish I had more time to talk about her. I think next time there will be some things I share about Elizabeth. There are lots of stories about sister wives and the conflict and the jealousy and all of that, all of which is valid. Whereas I was told growing up that, oh, well, women that complained, they just weren't faithful. Like, this was not an easy system to live in. Like, it was horrible for women, so horrible for women. But I have been touched over the years as I've learned about these stories of my polygamous ancestors and it's not often, but occasionally, I do find evidence of a sisterhood that developed between sister wives. And that is really touching to me because they were powerless women in a system that they did not create, they could not control. There was so much abuse and conflict, and it was not an easy way to live. But when I've seen situations where these women were able to support one another, I have found that really touching. And in other sources that I won't get into, my impression is, unless I find other information later, my impression is that Elizabeth cared for Mary Ann. Mary Ann was so young. And Elizabeth was much older than her, and here this teenager that suddenly her husband's having sex within their home, right? Like, it's so horrific. But Elizabeth, was the midwife, helped deliver all of Mary Ann's children. It seems to me that there was some care there. And what I have read about Elizabeth, I find myself feeling really grateful for her. I hope that Mary Ann had a friend in her. I don't know. I don't know if that was true, but anyway, so then this history goes on and says female trouble caused her health to break to the extent her children could not care for her. So she was taken to Provo because there was no old folks home or other place where she could go. Keep in mind, her husband was still alive.
Yeah.
They talk about that as though like she's a widow. She was only in her 50s at this point. Yes. Well, no, she would have, no. Math, it's not my best trait. She was born in 44. She was admitted in 1901. She's not 60 yet. She's only in her 50s, okay? So let's be clear about her age here. She's not this decrepit old thing. She's only in her 50s. Her husband was still alive. Elizabeth had passed away, but her husband was still alive.
Mm-hmm.
And it says that as though her children were responsible for, yes, her children are adults at this point. They're responsible for caring for her. They couldn't care for her. She had nowhere else to go. She had a husband, and okay, so we're going to get there. When they took her away, her only daughter, Lizzie, wept like a child. She wanted so to take care of her mother. And then it goes on to say that her husband, Richard, died the next year in 1902. And then Mary Ann Eccles died in July of 1906 in Provo and was brought to Kanab, which is King County, where her remains were laid to the side of her husband's in Kanab Cemetery. So this next line is about her son, Robert, her oldest son, Robert. He is our second great-grandfather. Mary Ann's son, Robert, writes of his mother, I never realized the worth of mother while she lived. That's I don't, if he's thinking he's saying something admirable about his mother, he's
Yeah.
saying something horrendous about himself.
I was going to say that is such an indicting thing to say.
And so I never realized the worth of mother while she lived. She was true to her calling, which her calling was motherhood, right? She was true to her calling, faithful to her husband and children. She never had much of this world's pleasures. She never lived to be very old. So she was 62 when she died. So yeah, she was solidly in her 50s when she was admitted to the asylum. She died after a long illness. In her casket, she looked sweeter than an angel, and if any of her children ever meet her again, they must live as he lived, keeping themselves free from sin and obeying the laws of the celestial kingdom of God.
So
So
even in the end, the only worth he could see in his mother was
what she did for others.
what she did for the religion,
Yes.
not
Yes.
even for others,
Yep.
but how good of a Mormon she was. Isn't that just apropos?
Not that she had options,
Yeah.
but yeah, she filled the role that was given to her, and yeah, she was a faithful Mormon and a mother. And but up here when it says like she was a frail, thin woman, had a very sad look on her face, very poor health. That poor woman, she never had a chance. Okay, one last thing about this, and then we'll be done. I need to find it though. Give me 2 seconds. It's not okay. And I just have to remember. Let's see. I contacted the hospital.
Wow.
Asked them. I know it was a long time ago, but do you still have records of inmates from, and I gave them the time period. And sure enough, they did.
Wow.
And I have her admittance record. And I apologize. They sent it to me in a secure, when I'm looking through the email, maybe this is it. Yes. I knew that I tried to resave it so that I didn't have to put in any kind of a password again. And I found it. So give me a second. Let me share this. 1 second. Okay. One last thing I'm going to share. Wrong every time. Hold on. Share. All right. Can you see that? So in the district court of the 60th, is that what that says? I can't tell. Judicial District of the state of Utah in and for Kane County. And it goes on to say R.S. Robinson, who is her husband, being first truly sworn upon his oath, says, I am acquainted with the condition of Mary Ann Robinson. I verily believe that said Mary Ann Robinson is insane and a fit subject for custody and treatment in the state insane asylum. The said Mary Ann Robinson, a resident of Kane County, Utah, and can be found in Kane County, so some of this is just repetitive. I therefore ask that the said Mary Ann Robinson be arrested and taken before the district judge of the county in which he shall be found. It says he because they only put he back then.
Yeah.
She shall be found for examination and commitment, or for such order as may be proper, and that a warrant issue to that effect. I believe that was what happened when you committed somebody. Men showed up at her house and took her away. And when that other, write-up talked about her daughter being, suddenly that has an entirely different, there's a different image there.
Well, and I noticed there's no description of how Mary Ann reacted. She's utterly omitted from the record of her own fate.
This has more detail that we're going to be able to learn a little bit more about her. You are correct. Like, she doesn't have a voice here.
Yeah.
If she had mental health issues, they were understandable. Let me just put it that way. After everything that she's been through.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
sheer powerlessness. And I know how it feels to feel powerless in a patriarchal system. She never had a chance. And maybe she did sincerely. Maybe she did sincerely. In that write-up that we just read, it said she had female problems. Was she going through menopause? Was that the female problem
Right.
that Richard couldn't
That's
handle?
that's the first thing I thought about. And I wonder if her normal experience of menopause, with its, of course, individual characteristics from woman to woman, whether all of that was just interpreted as her going crazy.
And the fact that whatever he said would be believed. She
Yeah,
would not
yeah,
have any recourse to speak
yeah,
up for herself.
hmm
He owned her.
yeah,
He
right.
owned her.
Yeah, yeah. She really was his ward, not his wife,
Mhm.
his ward.
Yeah. So we go down further. I mean, he signs it. There's whoever, Bunting, county clerk, whatever. Okay. So the physician's certificate. This is the physician, Neil, I think, Neil and Herbert, being duly sworn, both certify, each for himself, that he is a practicing physician in medicine, that at the request and the presence of honorable the judge of this particular judicial district, he has heard the testimony and personally examined the said Mary Ann Robinson in reference to the charge of insanity, and both find that, and they didn't fill her name in again, but Mary Ann Robinson is insane, and so far disordered in her mind as to endanger health, person, or property, and that said insanity is not a case of idiocy, imbecility, or simple feebleness of mind. The further facts appertaining to said case, and so it just includes more information.
Mhm.
Ann Robinson, age 57, nativity, England, married or single, married. If children, how many, their names and residence, and it does go through Robert Robinson is
Mhm.
7, and it goes through all of her children and their ages. The youngest, it looks like he's 20. If female and married, maiden name, blah, 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 Mary Ann Eccles, married Richard Robinson. It says she immigrated from England to Utah, 50 years ago. That's not entirely accurate. It's a little bit more,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
whatever. Occupation housekeeper. And this is where it gets really interesting. What evidence have you of the presence of insanity, violent actions?
Mhm.
Okay. That's interesting. So keep going. Is there a homicidal, suicidal, or incendiary disposition? Homicidal and incendiary. 57-year-old, frail
Rail.
Mary Ann
Yeah,
is violent. I'm sorry, Richard, but if she is violent, she cannot possibly be a danger to you.
yeah, yeah,
He gets to say whatever he wants to put her where he wants her.
yeah.
Did she finally start speaking up for herself?
Right. Yeah.
Did she finally start saying, keep your hands off of me?
hmm
Leave me alone?
Yeah.
Is the case blah, blah, blah. Some of this is not all that important, with, did it
Sure.
start occurring within the past 12 months? No. When did this attack first happen? 25 years ago?
Wow.
Was she trying to stand up for herself for years and years and years?
Yeah.
Elizabeth, and I don't have it right in front of me. Where's my phone? I I maybe my app will work for me quickly enough that I can find out when Elizabeth died. Give me a second, because I think that's important.
So if this was at her age 57, and this, the claim here is 25 years ago, then she would have been 32 at the time. When was Elizabeth born?
So Elizabeth is the sister wife,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and I apologize. I keep saying things like you're automatically going to remember. Elizabeth is the older sister wife. She was about 9 years older than Mary Ann. She died in 1899, and Mary Ann was committed in 1901. I think that means something. If she, like, Elizabeth wasn't around to support Mary Ann, to fight
uh,
her,
uh,
she didn't have her anymore.
yeah.
And she maybe she wasn't there to protect Mary. I'm asking questions, making some assumptions. I don't know. I think it's significant.
Well, that certainly would explain why the family and almost certainly the husband wanted to shuffle her off somewhere.
I have a hard time believing that she had been violent and threatening homicide for 25.
Right.
Like, there's no newspaper articles about her actually having harmed someone. There's no,
Mhm.
her daughter was screaming in despair as her mother was pulling her.
Yeah.
Even homicide,
Yeah.
her daughter wouldn't have wanted anything to do with her.
Hmm. Hmm.
I
Yeah.
just, it doesn't add up.
Yeah. Well, and what we're seeing is a huge disparity of perception along gender lines, right? The one daughter lamented her mother's committal. The one son's voice we hear has a kind of like really nonchalant regret. Oh, like I never realized,
All the
until
things
she
she,
was gone.
everything she did for me. Now I appreciate those things
Yeah.
for me.
And so we're seeing a very big difference in perception. I am super curious about what this 25 years ago thing was, whether it was just a glib, like, oh, I need to make it sound like she's been a problem for a while,
Exactly. Or if there's
or
any basis of truth.
something happened 25 years ago that maybe is what, like, in her old age, when she's finally just fed up, like this is the thing that she keeps going back to and accusing him of, or saying, like, whatever.
And I
So,
want to, yes, and I want to be careful because there are people who suffer from mental breaks to the point where they do become violent. I don't want to
sure.
say that there's no way that any of this is true. I'm just having a hard time believing it. They say she was frail and weak.
Yeah.
I just
Frailly.
I just have a hard time. So it goes on. Is this the first attack? He says, no, have been constantly increasing and of longer duration during the past 25 years, is what he says. They've been increasing. There are no rational intervals between incidences. She is incendiary and threatens other people. I mean, has she finally just said F you to him? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I don't know. And is there a
Hmm.
disposition to injure others? Yes. Directed against everyone, everyone. No, no one in particular toward, oh, not in particular toward relatives. So basically he's saying she's violent toward everyone, not just
Hmm.
relatives. She's
Yeah.
just violent. I mean, that sounds like such an exaggeration, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it says she's not suicidal. Is there a disposition to filthy habits, destruction of clothing and furniture? Destruction of clothing. There's a story there. Like,
Mm.
what did she throw something in the fireplace of his? I don't know. What did he say?
Yeah.
This, and
Right.
she was fed up and she threw it in the fireplace. I don't know. This I don't know anything about. Have any relatives, any grandparents and cousins been insane? And it says yes,
The
niece.
niece.
I don't have any information about that.
Yeah.
So we just go on. And then this suffers from epilepsy, suppressed secretions, whatever those are, eruptions, whatever those are, discharges or sores or injured in the head. And his answer is yes, suffers from epilepsy for 25 years. Now, my daughter has epilepsy. That is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
They did admit people in insane asylums for epilepsy. It was
Mhm.
fairly standard. I don't know. I don't really know what it means. I mean, I know what it is, obviously, but we haven't read anything or seen anything. And I just shared with you the surface. I have read through a lot of the other things on here. No one ever says epilepsy anywhere else.
Yeah.
25 years. I mean, epilepsy is such a huge part of a person's life.
Yeah.
Nobody else has ever said she had epilepsy.
Yeah.
The entire community would have known.
Yeah. It's an out of the blue claim.
And again, my daughter has epilepsy. Wait, it's hereditary. Could it mean? But she also has a lot of other disabilities that are
Right.
epilepsy is very prevalent with those disabilities. So it
Right.
doesn't
Right.
necessarily stem from anybody else in the family. But this to me, it feels like a lie. Because I
Well,
have read
yeah.
a lot of other things and nobody else mentions epilepsy.
Yeah. It seems arbitrary. It seems plucked out of the ether.
To me, okay, so he said homicidal, that she is destroying things like clothing.
Hmm.
He has epilepsy. To me, this feels like he is throwing noodles at the wall, seeing what will stick.
Yeah. See what'll stick. Yeah.
He has to make it sound bad enough so that he's
Hmm.
not the
Yeah.
bad person in the scenario.
Hmm.
Um, He thinks the insanity is progressive. And then it just, he signs the end. Richard Robinson, Kanab is the town, King County, Utah. And then other people sign it. And then it's, the warrant of commitment. There's not really any added information in this last page.
Right,
It's more
right.
details about, the doctors and whomever else. There is a book out that's came out recently. I downloaded it on Audible because I'd heard about it and I was like, I want to listen to that. Like people are talking about it. It is called, the reason I have to scroll down so far because it's called The Woman They Could Not Silence. And I have tried listening to it several times and it is so triggering. I can't. I stop it every time, but I hear it's an amazing book by Kate Moore. And it is about a woman who was committed to an insane asylum because her husband was tired of her.
Yeah.
But this apparently, and I haven't read it, but from what I understand, the story is about this woman who was committed on several occasions over the course of many years. She was not insane. She just stood up for herself. And the entire thing is just about her and how she couldn't be silenced and just how strong she was. And I think there's some significant change that she was behind. And again, I haven't read it. I don't know. That time in history, a man who was tired of his wife could commit her at any point.
Yeah.
Claim mental illness and put her in an insane asylum for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
Because she had postpartum depression, because she stood up for herself, because she, and then there was a day when there was an actual instrument, a muzzle that they could put on a woman's face that was like a cage for her head.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just that her mouth was covered and so she could barely talk. No, they had like a metal plate inserted that would hold her tongue down so that she literally could not talk. Yeah. And as I was learning about this, during my divorce, other people were told that I was mentally unstable. And that's why I wanted a divorce. And when I read through these documents and started like looking into the Provo, Utah Territorial Insane Asylum, which is now a reputable mental health hospital. From everything I understand, they do good work today for people who need help. But it started out as an insane asylum like all do. And it was, I have no doubt, it was just like all the rest in regard to it being a very unpleasant place to live. It was just so, it was so sobering for me to like sit back and think about my own experiences and realize that if I had been going through my experiences 120 years ago when Mary Ann was going through this, the suggestion that I wanted a divorce because I was mentally unstable was enough to have me committed. That standing up for myself was a sign of mental instability.
Yeah. Yeah. Considering from your own, community, your own group of acquaintances, how many people assumed it was true based on nothing, right? Based on, somebody told somebody told somebody. And they're like, oh, did you hear about Susanna? She's gone mentally unstable.
Yeah.
And just the belief based on nothing settles in.
And when I say, and I said, during our last recording, I alluded to this, I lost a lot of my community when I stepped away from my marriage and my religion at the same time. I went from having a robust community to really being very alone. And it fits with the narrative that I think a lot of people need to have in order for them to prioritize their religion over empathy.
Yeah. Yeah.
To believe that narrative, because there couldn't be a legitimate reason for me to want to leave the religion. There couldn't be a legitimate reason for me to be unhappy in my celestial marriage. So there must be mental instability.
Yeah. Well, and that's soft shunning, which we've talked about so much. It's not just an innate reaction, it's a method.
Yeah.
I mean, it's designed to be that way.
And speaking as somebody who was in the religion for so long, and I will take accountability, participated in that soft shunning. And that is something you and I can go into later, but you and I did not have a relationship for all of those years. And it wasn't because I anything but loved you, but I was so conditioned to believe that, you know, and it wasn't worded this way, but I can see it this way now. If I were to lean in far enough to listen
Mhm.
to you and why you didn't feel comfortable in the church anymore, if I were to offer you the level of empathy you would have needed in
Mhm.
order for me, or that I would have needed to offer you in order for you to like truly be able to communicate to me what your reasons were, and in order for me to like meet you where you're at and assume honesty and validity and everything to what your experiences were, that level of, leaning into that conversation and that level of empathy would have threatened my belief system.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if I were to think that what you were saying was valid in any way, which again takes empathy, if I were to offer you that empathy, it would cause me to have to seek to understand you, and that's the first step out of the church.
Yeah. The leaders know this. They know that that's the natural human, reaction.
Mhm.
That if you take that step, it will lead elsewhere,
And
and they
never,
will do anything to prevent that.
right. It never once did I think those thoughts as a
Yeah.
believing woman.
Yeah.
All I knew is I felt uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
It made me feel nervous and uncomfortable. And I was taught that when you feel like that, the negativity, the nervousness, the being uncomfortable, that's either the spirit prompting you, don't go there, or
Yeah.
it's like Satan's influence.
Yeah. Yeah.
But really all it was I was so conditioned to protect myself
Mhm.
from thinking outside of what I was supposed to in
Mhm.
order to
Yeah.
be who
Yeah.
they wanted me to be who God wanted me to be,
Mhm.
which equaled all of them being pleased. I was the kind of woman they needed me to be, well, quite frankly, to use me for their benefit, but that's
Yeah.
was taught to receive eternal salvation, you know?
Yeah.
I couldn't lean in and truly listen to your reasons for stepping away
Yeah.
from the church and maintain loyalty to the life that I had chosen.
Yeah.
And I did choose it. And in another episode, I do want to talk about the ways in which women participate in our own suppression. It is something that offends women sometimes, and that is a painful thing. But I came to the point where I realized I had to accept that my life, I was as powerless in my life because of my own
Yeah.
decisions. And that is a tough pill to swallow. But until I was ready to be accountable that I was the one that made the decisions that took me where I
Mhm.
was at. Yes, it is an entire system of
Mhm.
patriarchy. Yes, but I chose to stay. I chose to swallow my opinions over the
Mhm.
years to keep the peace. I chose to not do what I felt like was the right thing at times in order
Mhm.
to maintain the peaceful flow of life, constantly betraying myself deep inside. I
Mhm.
did that. Nobody else did that. I did that. And that's a tough thing for women to face, but we have to acknowledge those things in order to climb our way out of those situations.
Well, yeah, and it's important to acknowledge how insidious the culture is, that how deeply it gets its hooks in
Yeah.
so that you can participate in your own oppression. It's not a system that allows you to consciously be aware that you are being oppressed. It requires a kind of slow, yeah, I mean, I don't even know how to say it adequately. A slowly becoming or a slow sense of dread, like, have I gotten myself into something that I had no idea what I was doing at the time?
Yeah.
Once you reach that point, then yeah, you're like, oh, yep, that's exactly what happened. I let them put me here. And of course, women suffer this, most, but every Mormon reaches a point where they have to either accept where they have put themselves, where they have let the religion put them, or just go back to being completely, blind, completely just, yeah,
In some ways, you do have to numb out in order
yeah,
to
yeah,
remain in a system where you do not actually have autonomy.
Yeah.
And that just go exactly what you said. Patriarchy hurts men too.
Yeah.
It does give men more power than women. And for some men, that system is so aligned with how they want the world to work that
Hmm.
they will never they will always insist that it's how it should be.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
are plenty of men, that have left Mormonism that do talk about that pressure and that,
Mhm.
just how they also were harmed. I think that is 100% valid. So it's not only women that it harms, but
Oh, but yeah,
women.
being on the outside for so long, maybe I'm not the best to, express this, but even simply stating it that way, even simply saying, it harms everybody. Let's be clear that if we're gonna put it onto a percentage, the amount of damage done is far imbalanced against women. For every man who just has nothing but benefit from the Mormon patriarchal system, how many men within Mormon, how many believing Mormon men are harmed by it? It's still a small percent
It pales in comparison,
in
and
comparison.
pales in comparison
Yeah.
for sure. And it's in the past, it was only worse than
Yeah.
it is today.
Yeah.
So yeah, just to conclude, I said flippantly at the beginning, are you ready to have your heart broken? I never knew about Mary Ann until a couple
Yeah.
months. I've heard all kinds of faithful, inspiring family stories. It's admitted the record of her admittance to the insane asylum is so gut-wrenching. I mean, this is not a story that got passed down in our family. And when we talk about trauma, it
Well,
gets passed down genetically.
but it's not a story that got passed down, but it's also not a story that shocked me in the slightest, considering how, I mean, by now it's fairly well known the quantity of women in Utah who need and who seek mental care.
Uh, Today,
Yeah,
right?
today. And again, how much worse it would have been in the past under a polygamous system.
And I think that for me is the underlying point. Let's say she was everything that he claimed that she was.
Like it was some sort of moral failing on her part, right? As if she hadn't been just
Used, lied
right.
to, traumatized
Yeah.
over and over and over
Yeah.
again. And that was her one life. I mean, we'll
Mhm.
get into like our current beliefs, later in other episodes, but I look at that and I just think, that was her chance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know England was rough in those years. I know that the Industrial Revolution and working in factories and child labor,
Mhm.
and there's no saying that her life would have been better, but she
Yeah.
didn't think parents never imagined this would have been her
Mhm.
life. They came to America seeking something better.
Yeah. Well, and it is easy for me, and maybe this is flippant, but it is easy for me to imagine that life would have been noticeably better in any other little ranch town anywhere else out in the West. Any other little ranch town that was not also a religious, cult.
Yeah.
So,
A- a- re- like a religious dictatorship,
yeah, yeah.
because
I
that
mean,
very much.
life was hard for anyone, anywhere at that time. But
But if she had been somebody's actual love, if she had
mhm,
been somebody's only wife,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Some decent man
yeah.
who was just trying to hack an existence out of their situation like any other person who wasn't also on the prowl for younger wives,
Mm.
who wasn't also existing under the belief that he was one of God's chosen, just any other decent man in any other decent town.
Even with the inequality that existed in all
Mhm.
cultures,
Yeah,
back then,
yeah,
even with him, even with
yeah,
that patriarchal attitude, even with her, the laws of the land where she still would have belonged to that
yeah.
man, even under all of that, it would have been better. Yeah, that's my story for today.
That was a harrowing story.
And I, especially as we do this, want to highlight the stories of women who
Mhm.
nobody ever talks about. There's a lot about her husband that is pertinent to everything that you just said that I have not shared, and I won't take the time today.
Well, and honestly, I'll just be upfront and say I kind of don't care to learn about him.
So the reason why we need to learn about him is, well, actually, let me take that back. The reason why we are going to dive into his story is actually not because of him. I want to talk about his mother.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's actually why that story is important to me to tell. And it will inform, there's interesting information there that gives us a little more, I don't know, insight is probably not the word, but just some fills out the information about Mary Ann and, potentially what she experienced
Mm.
because of what Richard's mother experienced.
Mhm.
But we'll get into that another time. Her name is Mary Smith. There's a lot of Marys that exist in our heritage. Mary Smith Robinson instead of Mary Ann Robinson, but another
Mm.
week we will talk about Richard's mother, Mary. She is the person that Brian Buchanan is potentially going to talk about in Sunstone Mormon.
Okay.
And that's for me is really important. So we'll dive into that another time, another week. But that being what it is, I suppose we should say thank you to anybody that's been listening all of this time.
Mm.
It's a very long conversation. But again, for me, it's really important to have conversations about this inherited trauma that we, as part of the Mormon people, like we
Mm.
descend from the Mormon people,
Mm.
regardless of where our belief system is currently, we still carry trauma that we
Yeah.
inherited from these people, and we need to talk about the stories. That's the purpose of what I'm hoping to accomplish, and I appreciate you for letting me share these stories with you. And so for me, that's it.
Mm.
I look forward to sharing other stories in the future.
It will be, and yeah, to say it will be an adventure is not giving it the seriousness that it deserves.
It's
But
heavy.
yeah, you can't learn real history and you can't appreciate real history if you're not willing to look at some pretty dark moments in history. And that's what makes them so important. These things need to be seen, they need to be appreciated, they need to be used as lessons for the present world. It's an old cliche, of course, I mean, we don't ignore history, right? Ignoring history is so much the reason why the Mormon Church is in the state that it is today. And so maybe this can be our little contribution to not ignoring history.
Yes, I lost my thought. I think I'm just really tired, so that's okay. I
Mm.
think that's
Mm.
our cue. We need to be done for today.
Yeah.
So anyway, we will connect another week and talk about more things. Not everything will be this heavy.
Mm.
I want to, in the near future, after we talk about his mother, I want to talk about our grandfather, like
Mm.
our immediate grandfather. There's a lot of
Mm.
really fantastic stories. Some
Mm.
of them are very heavy, but it's also like just so fun because we actually knew him, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's going to come up soon. Anyway, thanks for being you. Thanks for being
Of
there for me
course.
and
Of
listening
course.
to me. Talk through the trauma of it all. And I
We'll do
look
it again.
forward to, yep, every week.
Mm.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.